So to start, I visited the abandoned Belchertown State School in MA twice. Once in the summer of 2015 and another time in the winter of 2016. I was with one friend the first time and two the second time. For privacy's sake, I'm going to call my first friend M and the second J. So, it was the first major abandoned complex that I'd ever been in. Initial impressions of the campus were exceedingly creepy, and that the physical state of the buildings were visually disturbing didn't help either. That was to be expected, I suppose, but then things got weird. Now, I'm not someone who inherently leans towards paranormal explanations, and I consider myself to be a pretty sound person of logic, I suppose, but there were feelings associated with Belchertown that have just forever stuck with me and my friends. Things that have certainly affected my life the last few years as well. The first of which occurred in a dormitory, the first building that I went into with M in 2015. The door was open, so we just kind of trekked through the brush and made our way into the building. Inside was pitch dark in the middle of the afternoon, and as soon as we stepped in, we heard the flutter of dozens of bats above us, which was quite a frightening experience at the time. At one point, I was standing in front of the main doorway taking photos, and M told me that he saw something walk in front of it from the outside, intercepting the sunlight. Naturally, I assumed that this was an animal, albeit completely silent. That is, until M told me that it looked like the black silhouette of a person walking swiftly right in front of the entrance. I figured that he was being paranoid, but needless to say, we left the building pretty quickly. The next instance happened in what I'm going to call the epicenter. Something was wrong with the whole campus for sure, but something was very seriously wrong with the auditorium building, specifically the basement. So we approached it from the side, walking up to a kicked-out basement window. I attempted to take some photos on my phone of the exterior window. Every photo that I took pointed in this direction showed up in my camera roll as just a complete black image. No information, just black. This happened several times as well, and at some point, M, who was using an early 1990s Canon SLR film camera, was not able to take a photo. His focus hunted and did not work even on manual, and then the camera just refused to even shutter. Now we were getting a little bit spooked, I'll admit, when suddenly a freezer-level burst of cold air came rushing out of the buildings and stood the hair on our bodies right up. We immediately left the area too because the feeling was truly uncomfortable. Later though, we ended up in that very basement of the auditorium, but it wasn't until our second trip that things started to get a lot more disturbing. So I was in that basement with M and Jay when Jay walked into a pitch-dark basketball court with his flashlight and just kind of froze in his tracks. He just kind of stopped his sentence short, then slowly backed out of the room, and he wouldn't tell us what was the matter. We brushed it off, but it wouldn't be until later when he told us what had actually happened. He explained that he believes that he had seen a black figure crouching in the far corner of the basketball court, up on those decaying wooden walkways. He said the figure stood upright, then stretched into the darkness faster than a person could, as though it just kind of stood up and stretched into the black at the same time. Anyway, we spent some more time in that basement before we truly got the feeling, the terrible, terrible feeling, and it was a feeling that something was definitely there. I'm always afraid to say this part due to people judging my credibility, but I'm sure that it wasn't human. And I mean, I say this in the sense that we all had that feeling that we were being watched or perhaps even hunted by something that was just truly evil. We couldn't see or hear it, but you could just feel it, like a weight that wanted to drive you insane. Now, I know a lot of terrible things happen at Belchertown, and I've been to a lot of creepy places since, but this takes the cake. As the sun began to go down that day, we all felt that feeling amplify. It embodied the whole campus at one point, and it felt really hostile. Driving back that day was the first time that I realized the feeling was back, that it had, in some way, shape, or form, followed me. In the weeks following, I'd experienced the feeling on and off, and in the months following, I would go through one of the hardest periods of my life. Whether or not it was actually related to that place, I obviously can't say, but at times it felt as though I was barely holding on to my sanity. just like whatever was in that basement wanted me. My friends and I all reported similar emotional problems around this time, and we later decided to unofficially establish that there was a disturbance from that place which had followed us all in different ways. Over the next few years, we would meet others who engaged in urban exploration, and some who had also been to Belchertown, and they all confirmed the same thing. Something was up with that auditorium basement. So I was a housekeeper for beach rentals for a short time, up and down the coast. Some houses were brand new and massive, others were original homes from the first settlers that have been able to stay in the family. I felt little things working in some of these homes, for sure. Just gut feelings that I'm being watched or that I'm not alone in the home, but I'm always able to dismiss it and laugh the fear off. Nothing ever happened to me to make me think that there was anything actually there. But then I was tasked to clean this older house, 2 stories, right on the beach. And right after walking inside, I heard a shuffle from the back bedroom. I yelled out who I was and all that, the housekeeping bit, but nobody answered, which is expected since no one is supposed to be there when I get there, but occasionally another housekeeper will stop by to help out and whatnot. I checked around quickly and I discovered that I was alone. So I just got started on my tasks. Now, the way the house is set up is the bottom floor is the 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all side by side and small. If you were in the bathroom, you would look down the very short hall into the end bedroom, with the other 2 bedrooms lining the hallway. The front door and the stairs on the top floor are parallel with the bathroom, kind of like an L shape. I'm just explaining the layout so you can picture this a little better, since I'm not about to go back there to get a photo. So, I started downstairs, in the bedrooms pulling all the sheets to wash. Kept feeling like someone was in the house with me, but again, I just brushed it off. I would keep looking over my shoulder behind me without thinking about it, and the pit of my stomach just grew and grew. I'm really good about staying logical and calm, laughing at my fear, but this was really bad. I just felt truly scared for once, and nothing had given me a reason to. The closer that I got to the end bedroom, though, the lump in my throat would grow. So I just kind of left it alone and decided that I would tackle it once I was done upstairs, with the kitchen and the living room and the bathroom. Once I got upstairs, I felt a lot better, but my eyes kept skirting over to the stairs. I could have sworn, though, that somebody was standing at the bottom, like it was unable to come up, just waiting. I say this because every time that I would glance over, the slightest shadow would move, as if the top of the head was peeking up into view. Being upstairs, though, I was able to calm myself down and put on some music and get to cleaning. Once I was done, I was able to go downstairs again confidently, but once I got to the bottom, I was attacked by just complete fear. I was frozen, eyes wide, walking slowly and doing my tasks quickly and quietly, always looking around. I eventually went into the back bedroom and I walked around the side of the bed so I could keep my eyes on the door. I pulled sheets and pillowcases, but I was getting slower and slower at it. My anxiety was leaving my fingers tight and shaky. Then a breeze flew into the room, but only underneath the bed. Cold and rushed my feet, and then it remained extremely cold on just one of my ankles. It was like something was grabbing my leg, but made out of cold air, and I didn't know what to do but shuffle sideways away from the bed in a frozen sidestep. Then I just darted upstairs, and I sat outside the upper porch shaking until I calmed myself down. I was forcing myself to make up any logical excuse for that because I truly didn't want ghosts to be real and me to have to deal with this right now. I was so scared, though, that I was ready to walk out of that house and call my work, but I knew that they would fire me and I really needed the money. So I calmed down and I focused on finishing the upstairs. I went into the bathroom and noticed that there was a painting in there. Realizing that there was no artwork in the entire house except for this piece. It was of 2 women hanging out of windows, dressed in old-timey clothes, I think the 1700s, and everything was painted black except for them and the windows. and looking closer at their faces, I saw contempt. One girl was looking away with anger, the other was staring right at me with a smile and just evil eyes is the only way I can describe it. And then I noticed that everywhere I moved in the bathroom, her eyes followed me. I tried to clean the mirror and I couldn't stop staring back through it at the painting behind me. My gut told me to just get the hell out of that bathroom, and so, in the end, I did. I couldn't even bring myself to even look at the closed door of the bathroom. It made me so scared. And this fear that I'm describing, it was unlike any other feeling that I've ever had. It was being forced on me. All my senses just painfully active. My body was screaming at me to kick rocks. But I had to finish at least bare minimum, and I still had to make the beds and vacuum the floor, and I truly couldn't lose this job. And I mean, how would I explain that I didn't finish because I was spooked? No one would believe me. So, I'm running downstairs, rapid, making the beds and finishing up. I go into the bathroom to wipe off the mirror, and I look into it, and I see the doorway behind me into the end bedroom. And I swear to you that there was a figure just standing there, made completely of shadow. Everything radiating off this figure was just making my skin crawl too. The hair was standing up on the back of my neck, and I even started to cry without realizing it. I blinked after what felt like forever just staring at it, and as soon as I did, it was gone. I whipped around to face whatever it was, but I didn't see anything. I stared into the bedroom from the bathroom for a few seconds, contemplating making a dash for the door, when I saw the vacuum still plugged in there, and I couldn't leave all my tools behind. All I had to do was grab it and load it up, and everything else was taken care of, though. So I started to yell to garner bravery. It made me feel a little better. Just a lot of mock confidence, like, "Oh yeah, you little bitch," and stuff like that, as I'm marching in and wrapping the cord up. I'm looking down, clicking the little backside of the plug in part onto the wire, when I suddenly see in my upper peripheral someone in front of me, in between the bedroom and the bathroom. I was so taken aback by this that I instantly looked up, and right at a woman staring back at me. She was just standing there in a nightgown-like dress, and she was just staring at me. My body started vibrating with adrenaline, heart pounding, fear locking my bones. I literally couldn't comprehend what the hell I was looking at, but her eyes were just evil, and she wanted to hurt me, I think. And this thing was standing between me and my exit out of there. I looked back down at the vacuum cleaner with a quick thought of chucking it at her when she just disappeared. I didn't wait. I took that chance to sprint out the door, and when I did, I found that it wouldn't open. I'm shaking the doorknob at this point, and I'm trying to scream for help, but my throat is making whispers. I'm unlocking and relocking, kicking, and it's just not budging. I dart upstairs and clutch the couch, staring wide-eyed at the stairs. Literally in front of my eyes, she comes up to the halfway mark, staring at me, just looking pissed. She's dipping in and out of vision, like her body is made of different thickness of smoke or something. Her face is fading a little, and then her body, but she kind of just stayed there. I truly didn't know what else to do but run for the porch next to me, hang off the balcony, and drop the 7-ish feet down. And when I landed, I looked up at the front door, and it was cracked open just partially, like it was inviting me back inside. I walked down the street a bit, called my boyfriend to come and get me, and I just cried. When he got there, I explained everything, and I think that he wanted to believe me, but like how I am, everything can be met with logical answers. I calmed down quickly with him there, and we just went home. I ended up quitting shortly after due to poor hours, but I ended up telling my manager while I was still there that I would not work for that house again, and she said that I wasn't the only one to complain about feeling creeped out in that house. I didn't tell her what I saw because, well, I didn't want her to think that I was crazy, and it made me wonder who else cleaned it and saw something but didn't say anything besides feeling creeped out. I do still have nightmares sometimes about that painting. I mean, why was it the only one, and who made it? How old was it? I hate seeing their dead stare in my dreams, and it's been a year since then. I can promise you guys too that I have never felt fear like this, and I still can't explain everything that happened that day. About a year ago, I was in a very dark place spiritually and emotionally. I rarely prayed, and I had so many insecurities, worries, and problems in my life that it was a struggle to just get by day. It was at this period in my life that I started to wake up to these black figures in my room almost every night. I can't remember when it started, but I remember the worst nights to this day. Usually, they show up either beside or at the end of my bed, sinister and blacker than black. I never had sleep paralysis, and there was never anything in my room that could look like these things, yet I still saw them. It got so bad, in fact, that I had to sleep with a flashlight next to my bed because the only way to get rid of them was to quickly shine my torch at them when I woke up. Now, usually I would wake up to one in my room, which would freak me out on its own, but one night I woke up and saw 3 of them, all surrounding my bed, all the same height and all facing straight towards me, not moving or talking, just kind of watching me. Now, all of this can be explained rationally, right? Overactive imagination or just being half asleep. Well, I have 2 reasons why I think that these things are very much real. So I woke up one night seeing a smaller one like a child at the end of my bed, and for some reason I wasn't scared. I think it was because I was still waking up, but I've never spoken to these things ever, but on that night I did. I just said, "I can see you," while looking towards it, and the creepiest thing happened. It started moving towards my desk and literally stood behind my desk as if it was trying to hide. And my other reason is, earlier this year, some missionaries came to our place for dinner, and I asked them to bless the house and our family. And after that, I never saw one in my room again. Many can call this coincidence, I know, but I don't think it was. I think those things were very real, and something got rid of them. I don't tell anyone in my family because I think they would be creeped out, to say the least, and I don't want to scare them. Plus, I'm not so sure that anyone is going to believe me. I was 16 at the time, and I was dealing with some shady characters for shady reasons that I won't go into. I had 2 friends, though, that I was very close with at the time, who were basically my guides to the street because up until then I was pretty much a sheltered kid. Anyway, one night we were at a club having drinks and dancing. Great night, went well, ended up getting familiar with this boy around my age. He was 18, a med student, hot as hell, and I just couldn't resist. I was pretty drunk whilst making this decision, and I was separated at the time from our designated driver. I clearly said yes like the horny moron that I was, and a few moments later I ended up in his car, doing some stuff while he drove me back to his place. We pulled up to a house which, in a better state, I would have recognized as being a red flag house. 2 stories, decrepit catwalk, built into the side of a hill. It looked like 200 plus years old. You get it. Spooky looking. He turns off the car and tells me to wait there while he heads in to clean up and get ready. I agreed and he bolted inside. I was waiting for like an hour and a half, I think. And eventually I got tired of waiting, got out, and I started heading up the hill to the window. Inside, I could hear all kinds of clattering and glass being moved, as well as several animals. Now, I was still expecting certain things to happen that night, so I figured a little peep through the window wouldn't hurt. But instead of naked pecs and body oil, I saw him moving a bunch of old bottles on a handcart into another room down the hall. I got curious, and my state was beginning to improve, so I ran around the house to the other window. And there I saw hundreds of those same jars sitting on shelves and piled up on the floor. With a closer look, the jars looked like they all had what appeared to be animal parts and maybe even fetuses inside, which somehow made sense to me considering that he said something about wanting to be a vet at some point. I now realize that I was rationalizing all of this under a horny and drunk state, which may have gotten me killed in the end had I not been so nosy. Anyway, He was coming back, so I dashed back to the car and waited, acting more drunk than I was at this point. He ushered me out of the car and we started making out right there. Then he started moving me toward the house. At this point, I was beginning to get creeped out from the previous information that I had now begun to process. But he just kept physically pushing me towards the house, and I pretended to stumble and pushed back at him. But he just grabbed me by my shoulders and kept pushing me harder, and I was sober enough to be scared though. But we got inside, and the first thing that I noticed was just the smell of the house. Like heavy chemicals and actual shit. He again told me to wait there in the foyer, but this time it was much more forceful. He booked it around a corner, and as soon as he did, I caught a glimpse of his kitchen through the living room shutter. And there was blood and tarps everywhere, with fur and feathers lying around too. And at this, I immediately unbolted the door, slipped out, and knocked a pile of timber in front to bar it shut before taking off faster than I have ever run in my entire life. I never want to really know what he was doing in there, but thinking about the possibilities sure makes me sick to my stomach. I've never gone out like that since then, and I don't plan on doing it ever again. So I was about 13 at the time that this happened. It was coming up for my mum's birthday, and I had no idea what to get her, so I called my aunt for help. We agreed to meet in town on Saturday afternoon, after my piano lesson, so we wouldn't have to rush. I went to my piano lesson as usual, dropped my books back at the house, and went to the bus stop to get the bus into town. As I was waiting, a taxi pulled up and the driver rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, are you going to so-and-so? I'll give you a lift." Without moving closer to the taxi, I replied that I couldn't afford a taxi, and plus the bus would be there in a minute. It was, as usual, running late. The taxi driver became insistent, though, that I get into his taxi and that he wouldn't charge me to go to town. I stood my ground, refusing to get in, but his tone became more aggressive as he demanded that I get into his taxi over the next minute or so. Someone else arrived at the bus stop, and the taxi driver sped off, swearing at me for not getting into the taxi. I told my aunt what happened when I met her in town, and she asked if I had his license number so she could report the incident. I explained that I didn't want to move closer to the taxi to get the number, and that at first I thought that he was just looking for a fare. My aunt is pretty sure that if I had gotten into that taxi, that I wouldn't have been dropped off into town, but taken somewhere else. And she told me that next time this happened, to tell them to get lost or I'll scream. And if they approach, to try and run. For a large chunk of my childhood, my dad and my stepmom lived in this house that was built in the 50s and made me fear the nighttime every weekend that I had to stay there. Most nights that I stayed there, I would wake up at some point in the night and hear either symphonic orchestral music coming from downstairs, or what kind of sounded like monks chanting. It scared me so badly that I couldn't even get up to go and wake my dad up. I just kind of laid there, paralyzed with fear. One day, though, when I was a teenager, my stepmom briefly and casually told me that she can see spirits. She and my dad are incredibly religious, so that's not necessarily something she likes to talk about. She doesn't want to see them, and unfortunately for her, she's a realtor, so she sees them frequently, as I'm sure you can imagine. Anyway, she tells me that she often sees the spirit of an old man and a little boy, and not necessarily together, in our house. There are many other little things that happen in that house as well. Like, I remember my aunt, very level-headed, being afraid of our dining room and/or dining room table for some reason that she never disclosed. I remember one day that my dad came downstairs and found a literal pile of dirt in front of the door to the laundry room and the closet, and no idea how it got there. We also had ADT, and our alarm system would sometimes go off in the middle of the night with no explanation. Now, one day my stepmom is home alone in the office, which is in the back of the house, on the first floor, and always gave everyone the creeps. And she hears a noise coming from the living room. There were 3 DVD stacks on top of each other on the top of the TV, and the DVD stack that was in the middle was now laying in the middle of the room, and had hit the floor so hard that the flap in the middle that holds the discs had been broken out of the case. One day, my dad is home alone and leaves to go run a quick errand. He's gone for maybe 20 minutes, and when he comes back, there are loads of flies just surrounding the inside of the window in the garage that definitely weren't there before. One night I woke up and heard what sounded like a small bouncy ball being gently tossed down the stairs. I went back to sleep that night and I never mentioned it. But several weeks later, my best friend Josie is spending the night and we're sleeping down in the less used living room, big house, and she wakes me up and tells me that she heard what sounded like a bouncy ball being bounced in the foyer. I'm sure that there's more that I can't remember, but all of it, as you can imagine, has really creeped me out. This happened about 1.5 years ago, and it was around 2 or 3 a.m. in the Houston area, one of the top cities for sex trafficking, on a weeknight. My friend and I were driving around, and we stopped at a Walgreens for something that I can't remember. Only, I got out of the car to go into the store, and I saw a white van just sitting outside. At the time, I didn't think anything of this. So, after I make my purchase, I walk back to my friend's car and we leave. As we were driving off the lot, though, she comments that her tire air pressure light had come on, and so we needed to stop to put some air in it. For whatever reason, we stopped at the most sketchy or secluded gas station to air up at, and it was closed as well. The dumbest decision ever, I know, but we both got out of the car to air it up, and about a minute passes before I just started feeling this rush of intuition screaming at me that it was time to leave. Following my instinct, I tell my friend that her and I should leave because I wasn't having a very good feeling about something. She agrees and puts away the air pump, and I kid you not, as she's putting the hose up, that same white van from Walgreens zoomed up to us in that gas station. It all happened so fast, but I was screaming at my friend to rush into the car and dip out of there. As we hopped into the car, the van door slid open so fast and these huge men were coming out of it. Thank God that we were in the car in time, because if we would have waited just a mere 30 seconds more, chances are I wouldn't be typing this. We sped out of the gas station, and of course the van started following us until eventually we lost them. I have many theories about this situation, but one of them is that they could have been sex traffickers and they spotted me at the Walgreens as an easy target. I'm a noticeably feminine gay man, and decided to hunt me down, and my friend too, who is actually a girl. Regardless though, one thing is certain. I know that their intentions were not good at all. Be careful out there, hey. When I was younger, the show Ghost Hunters was a new thing. Me and my friend used to hang out around the local ice rink in Flagstaff, AZ, and call out spirits for fun. And the first night was something that I'll never forget. The first night we saw a soda can get lifted and suspended in air for a second and then drop. There's a shed next to the ice rink with a garage door there, and something was banging on the door, and the lights came on inside. The only way to get in was the side door or the garage door, and neither had been opened. We started telling some other people about it, and next thing you know, people would come around the woods, Buffalo Park, next to the rink, just to call out spirits. But we've seen full-body apparitions with red eyes. 3 people all saw a little girl turn into a wolf and run off into pitch-black darkness at the same time, and we had several people with us when we saw yellow darting eyes and heard a drum approach us. And at the very end, it was like somebody banged a drum right in front of us, and everybody just ran in fear. Some wild stuff for sure. Hard to get others to believe my stories, I know, so I hardly tell them, but I know the truth, and my friends know the truth as well. But anyways, years later, I went through a religious phase and became Christian after straightening my life out. And while praying in my living room one day, my bedroom was tossed around. I heard my name being called by what sounded like a chorus. I had some sort of a demonic hiss in my ear that I could feel the breath of after I prayed for God to help me with my strange encounters. And it stopped after that and didn't resume until another 2 years later. So, I was with my girlfriend at the time, asleep in my room, when I woke up laying on my side and I saw what looked like black stripes of cloth that had a smoky texture to them above my girlfriend. Half awake, I reached over to her and shook her, and then I rolled over to see what looked like the Grim Reaper on my ceiling. It was a hooded large figure that was pitch black, smoky texture, but you could see the outline of its body, like arms, head, and torso. Its robes were moving like they were alive. It's really hard to explain, but I felt that every part of this thing was somehow alive, like some sort of energy that you can sense. It leaned down like it was trying to get a better look at me, and at that point, I lost it. My body automatically started to scream on its own louder than I've ever screamed before, and I couldn't stop it. The feeling of fear that I felt that day was the most surreal feeling that I could never explain. It was just truly horrific and dreadful, the feeling that I had. My girlfriend woke up amongst my screams, and she saw it as well and completely shut down, crying and hiding under a blanket while I shouted "go away" just uncontrollably. It was like my brain knew what to do, but my body went into action yelling, and I just watched. And eventually I ended up passing out, I think from fear. The passing out was unusual though, because I've been on a plane that had an engine failure and almost crashed into trees, and the fear that I felt from that, thinking that I was certainly going to die, was still not even close to the feeling of fear that this thing gave me. It was like my soul was afraid of it or something, not just my body and mind. Anyways, after that encounter, we had a door pop open on its own after waking up at 3 a.m, and that was the end of it for quite a long time. Fast forward to now, I live in an apartment with my daughter and her mother. We've not had much unusual stuff happen during the time that we've been together. The only strange thing that we have had happen was we both woke up at 1:20 a.m. when my girlfriend was pregnant and her water broke minutes after. That one I think was probably just a strange coincidence, but it's probably worth mentioning. But the other night, I woke up and saw a dark figure rising out of the space between our closet and doorway. Thinking that I was just half awake and still dreaming kind of, I just shrugged it off as just that. The following day, my girlfriend and me are home, and we start hearing some serious banging on the bathroom door while in the living room watching TV. I rush to see why my girlfriend is making so much noise, and we meet in the hallway. She was frustrated, asking why I would scare her like that. I told her that I'd just gotten up to see what the noise was too, and she gave me a frightened look and just told me that she didn't believe me, and we got into a short argument about it. But the next night, I'm awake in bed next to her, and we're both on our phones when we hear what sounds like someone going through our kitchen drawers. The sound of silverware rustling around and the wooden drawers sliding open was enough to make me get up and grab my Mossberg and my girlfriend to phone the police. I turn my tack light on and investigate for potential intruders, and when I hit the kitchen, it's clear, but the kitchen drawers are opened, which is really weird. I switch that light on and the living room light on too, and there's nothing. I check my daughter's playroom and the bathroom, and all clear. I realize no windows have been opened and the front door is still locked and not messed with. I tell my girlfriend to tell the dispatcher that there was no break-in. They tell her, and they still want to send an officer out to follow up, but we decline and let the woman on the phone know that we'll call if needed. We make sure the house is clear one last time, talking about what happened, and eventually we go to sleep. Just this morning, I woke up with my girlfriend, and we start our day as usual, heading into the kitchen to get our daughter's breakfast started, and now everything is open, drawers and cabinets, and nothing is thrown out, nothing is taken or destroyed. We both know that something just isn't right, and we're looking into what we can do. My girlfriend found a shop that sells crystals and all that other crap, and we get something called holy wood and candles. We're told to burn the candles while burning the holy wood and say a prayer while walking room to room with the burning holy wood. And as far as this moment goes, I haven't seen or heard anything, but I'm 100% sure that something has attached itself to me at some point. All I'm hoping is that this is the end and that finally I've gotten rid of it. work at a busy company in Orlando, right in the heart of iDrive. If you're not familiar with this area, it's short for International Drive, which is short for Tourist Central. This meant that I tended to work a lot of nights, which my husband was never fond of. A couple of my co-workers had some weird experiences in our parking lot, so we always left after 10 p.m. with another person, so we had someone when we walked to our car. And us females definitely made sure to do so as well. Now, this night in particular, I closed the store at around 1:30 in the morning and was walking to my car, waving goodnight to a co-worker with one hand and already dialing my husband's number in the other. Though we lived only about 25 minutes away from my job, we both liked to call one another when we were leaving, wherever we were, so we could let the other one know of an expected arrival. Plus, on nights that I closed, it was kind of nice to fill him in on the night's adventures and current gossip and whatnot. This is also a good time to mention, too, that I lived in a not-so-great part of Orlando. When I moved there for school, we moved into one of the cheapest apartments that we could find, which incidentally meant moving into the ghetto. I didn't mind it much overall. Our neighbors were nice and the apartment was affordable for the time being. But anyway, as I continued my drive home, I became occupied with complaining about my long shift and how I'll not be home until about at least 2 a.m. and I turned into the usual side street that connected two state roads. And right at the end of this road was my complex. This road usually only lasted about 8 minutes and it ran through a rundown neighborhood, but I always got a bit of excitement turning down it because it was my last turn, meaning that I was almost home. So I'm driving down this windy, empty road when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement of another car. As I mentioned before, this road ran straight through a neighborhood, which also held an endless amount of side roads on it that led to loops and circles that were littered with houses. It's very dark, only lit by headlights and the dim streetlights as well. But I could see a van heading my way out of one of the side streets, not even 15 feet in front of me. And this next part happened so fast that I had no idea how to react. I see shadows inside the van, in the passenger and the driver's seat, and suddenly there's a man hanging out of the passenger side window with a pistol. He fires off multiple shots straight at a corner house directly next to me at this point. My heart drops and all I can say is, holy crap. My husband is still on the phone with me and actually heard the gunshots too. He becomes frantic, asking what happened and if I'm okay, and all I can mutter is, I just saw a drive-by. As I pass by the house where the shooting happened, the driver of the van peels out and onto the road that I'm driving on and flies right up behind me. At this point, my heart is racing. The attackers are right behind me, the only vehicle on the road, and the only witness to their crime. I tell my husband that they're behind me, and he quickly talks me down and tries to calm me. But my eyes can't stop shifting between my rearview mirror and the road in front of me. The van behind me is swerving back and forth on the road, falling a few feet behind me and then back up at the bumper again. I say out loud that I don't know what to do, and my husband tells me that if they continue to follow me, to go to our local police station. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, the driver whips it to the left and down a road deeper into the neighborhood, leaving me alone on the road once more. I was home within minutes, and my husband was just as shaken up as me, saying that he can still hear those gunshots from the other end of the phone, waiting for what felt like an eternity for me to say something and tell him what happened. I saw the police there the next morning when I went to work, but I never found out how bad or just how fatal the shooting was. I've since moved from that neighborhood and will hopefully never have to witness a drive-by 8 minutes from my home again. So, this happened like literally about 5 minutes ago, and I'm still outside in my PJs because, well, I'm just too scared to go back in the house. I live in an old house, and I've been here about 2 years, I think, and since I moved in, loads of stuff has happened to myself, my OH, and other people who have visited or stayed over. Things like being touched, footsteps, things moving, falling over, lights turning on and off, shadows and voices. So many things that have made me want to move out, but I'm just flat broke and I just can't afford it. But anyway, There's nobody but me in the house, and I'm just hanging up some washing in the utility room. I pick up the laundry basket to hang the socks up and get about halfway through the kitchen, and there's this noise behind me in the utility room. I don't know how to describe it, other than a deep, growling scream kind of thing. Whatever it was strange and loud, and I've never in my life heard anything like it. I wish that I could explain it better, but I just don't know how. It was just a weird and scary noise. I just kind of froze like a deer caught in headlights and spun around and stared at the door and walked backwards until I backed into my front door and ran out into the garden. And now I'm sat here, half ashamed for running away and terrified of what the hell I'm dealing with in my house. And I'm horribly aware that I'm alone in here for another 8 hours. I think that I'm going to have to go and investigate now that I can remember how to breathe again. Wish me luck. I've had plenty of paranormal experiences in my life. None were all too terrifying, though at the time they seemed like it. But one event has really stuck with me more than any other. So, as a kid, I didn't have many friends and tended to hang out with my cousins more than anyone else, who were always spending the night at my house. We'd watch movies and eat snacks and eventually all pass out in the living room. This happened when I was about 8 years old. I was asleep on one of the couches, my youngest cousin was on the floor beside me, the other two were across the room, and I woke up in the middle of the night due to my nearest cousin coughing. It was more like he was choking even, and I rolled over and turned to look down at him, when I saw something in the dark. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but staring for a few moments, I clearly could begin making out a shape from the hallway light. This thing, whatever it was, looked skeletal skinny and was wearing not quite a cloak, but more like a hooded shawl, and it looked very, very old. It looked like it would disintegrate if I even touched it, and it was kneeling over my cousin as he continued choking, as if very interested in him. And then it saw me. The figure immediately backed off, and standing up, it must have been nearly 8 feet tall at least, because it practically reached the ceiling. It slowly backed away into the dining room, and my cousin stopped coughing. I sat there huddled up in my covers, feeling like I was being watched for the rest of the night, and stayed that way until the dawn when the sunlight came in, and I knew for sure that this thing was gone. I never felt safe in the house after that, and more things happened there for sure, but that was by far the most terrifying. Everyone I've told it to has written it off as you probably were just dreaming, or you just think you saw something, but I was wide awake, and I know what I saw. I just really have no idea what it was. So this experience took place in Nepal in June, and it's going to be a bit of a long one, so strap in. I travelled there with just 6 other students who were all girls from my college to do a volunteer internship there, just outside the main city of Kathmandu. We were all 20 and 21 years old. The whole trip was 6 weeks, I think, but we were done with the internship after 5, so we planned to just go do whatever we wanted for the last week. We ended up taking a 7-hour bus ride to Pokhara, which is one of the most touristy cities in the country. A lot of the Himalayan treks people do start from there, and it's a popular paragliding location too. The nice area of the city where travellers stay is called Lakeside, as there's a huge lake there. We were staying in this area in a decent quality hotel for 6 nights for only the equivalent of $50. For the record too, this is overall a very safe country, although very poor, and not once besides this experience did I ever feel unsafe. Just about everybody is incredibly friendly, in fact. Violent crime rates are also significantly lower than the US, and guns aren't really a thing there for anyone that's not police. Anyways, one night, we're all at this place that had live music, where we're all just kind of chilling, having a bunch of drinks and smoking some stuff. And when we leave there, I'm like 410 drunk. We start talking to some guy, about 40 years old, on the sidewalk, and we're smoking some cigs with him, but I don't remember what we were talking about. It's about 9 PM at this point, and the girls all decide to take a quick taxi ride back to the hotel and call it a night. I decided I'm going to keep staying out for a bit though, as some of the nights before I had a lot of fun solo bar hopping and just talking to both locals and other travellers from all over the world on the street. I would often just find myself in like 30-minute conversations with random local dudes and felt really comfortable being out on my own. So I continued to talk to this guy. His accent was hard to understand and didn't speak the best English, but we were still able to communicate fairly well. I didn't care if I had to ask him to repeat stuff, and other times I'd just pretend that I understood what he said. He starts asking what kind of drugs I do, and although I occasionally smoke weed, I'll admit, I didn't want any, so I just tell him that's my only drink. So he's like, oh, follow me and we can get some beers. We go over to a nearby small convenience store. We each buy a tall boy of pretty heavy beer and then go back on the street chilling. He keeps asking me if I need anything and is like, you want girls? And does this little air hump thing and made it clear that he meant like prostitutes. We're both laughing though, and I'm like, nah, I'm not into that. So we just walk down this path by the lake drinking and chatting. The path was fairly populated, and he wasn't an intimidating guy by any means. He's like 5'4", and I'm not a lot taller, but yeah, he wasn't a scary guy. At this point, I'm moderately drunk and just seeing what type of adventure I can get into, and we end up taking a cab a pretty short distance to his home. So now it's a poor area, but it's not that sketchy, but it is where the story gets a little bit weird. So we're walking up this path now, and he wants me to follow him down to this one more sketchy path, and I don't really get what he's saying, but I tell him no. We go into his place, which was literally just a super small rectangular room with a few beds and not a whole lot else. There's 3 people already in there as well. One of them is his brother that looks a bit younger than him. One is his mother that is like a sweet 60-year-old lady. She didn't speak English at all, but she was friendly and smiling and definitely thought that it was funny that her sons were chilling with an American. The other person is some guy sleeping just right in the middle of the floor on nothing. And it was hard to tell, but he didn't really look related to them. He still had darker tannish skin, but was much lighter than them. I thought that this was a little weird too, but it seemed normal to them, so I didn't pay much attention to it. So I'm just kind of sitting on the edge of the bed, smoking cigs with them, talking about just random stuff. His brother seemed like he had something slightly wrong with him, as he was kind of cross-eyed and looked like he was looking straight through me when talking. I took a selfie with them smoking a cig, as I would do this sometimes with random locals because it was funny. And they start asking me to drink this stuff in a jug or something. It's hard to remember what it looked like. They were saying that it was liquor from this one nearby mountain. But I was skeptical, so I was like, no, you drink. And he said something about how he doesn't drink liquor anymore after the earthquake or something. Then his brother is like, watch, and starts drinking it, but I was trying to see if he was just pretending to drink it, and I really couldn't tell. I still had a bit of my beer left, though, and I told them that I'm just good with that. So the guy is like, just have a little, and pours a small amount into my can. I was still pretty relaxed, but they could sense that I was kind of skeptical, and one of them asks me why I'm afraid. But he says it like afraid in his accent. So I just play dumb, laughing, and I'm just like, I don't know what afraid is. At this point, I tell them that I've got to go back to my hotel, and me and the original guy leave and get into a taxi, and I tell them where to go. I still got this beer in my hand, by the way, but I didn't drink it anymore, but kept holding it throughout, just so that he wouldn't bother me about it. I still knew the general area that I was in, as I got a pretty good sense of direction, and this cab takes a left when it should have been a right. I tell them that it's the wrong way, but the original guy insists that it's the right way. I'm like, whatever, maybe it's quicker, right? But also a part of me was kind of thinking, as we start going deeper into the city, that something just wasn't right. Eventually we do end up on the main lakeside strip, but we're going way down it, a lot further than my hotel is. I tell him, but he just didn't seem to care and was saying to relax and that we're going to go sightseeing or something like that, which didn't make any sense because it's nighttime. They start playing Justin Bieber thinking that I'd like it, but I'm still back low-key kind of pissed. Now I'm sitting there like, well, if something bad is going to happen, I just kind of ruined the trip for everyone. And I didn't have any phone plan and could only contact people if I had Wi-Fi. We get past the end of the lakeside strip, which is the farthest that I'd been previously on other days. The road then curves around the lake and turns into a dirt road heading outside of the city, and there's not many buildings past there. We drive down this for like 5 more minutes and then stop in the road and we get out. There's finally a bunch of some buildings a bit ahead, but not that many again. The guy starts walking towards those, saying to follow him, and at this point, I'm like, nah, I'm going to walk back over to the taxi, telling the driver that I didn't ask to be over here. The guy realizes I wasn't following him and walks back over to the car and starts talking to the guy, in Nepali for a minute, while I'm just kind of standing there. They say that they'll take me back for what is the equivalent to $15. I'm pissed and I'm arguing with them to bring me back for free. I tell them that I'd rather walk back instead of paying that, and I start going. I knew pretty much where I was, but it would have taken a little over an hour to walk back to the hotel. He tells me no, that it's too far, and after more arguing, I get them to agree to $5. They eventually drive me back to the hotel, thank God, and when I'm paying, I give him the $5, but he was like, I thought it was $15. I was like, we agreed on the lower price. So I give him the $5 and I get out, but the original guy gets out with me and wants to go into the hotel because he says that he needs water. It's about midnight now. The lobby is basically outdoors, and I put him to the water jug, and I was able to go upstairs to my room without him following me anymore. I ended up throwing up once I got back, partially from being a little drunk still, and partially from being freaked out by wondering where that guy was actually taking me. It's something that I'm probably going to wonder about for the rest of my life, too. I mean, there is a small chance that the dude could have led me to some fun stuff, but he just progressively gave me a more and more sketchy vibe as the night went on, and I trusted my gut feeling. I still don't know if the taxi driver and the guy knew each other or not. I could have got robbed or kidnapped or something else, and maybe the guy on the floor had been drugged by the drink and they wanted to give me it, but who knows? I also just could have been way paranoid. Overall, I don't necessarily regret it because I played my cards right. I do stupid stuff when I'm drinking sometimes, and it's good that I stopped when I did. The whole trip was awesome though, and you're safe as long as you don't do stupid stuff like I did. It's one of the coolest countries, and I do hope to go back someday. But I'm curious, what do you guys think would have happened if I would have kept following this guy? I live in a very small, quiet street in the mountains. Not many people know that my street exists, and it's actually quite hard to find. I work from home, so I'm home all day, and the only other person at home in my street would be my next-door neighbour, who is in his 70s. I'm actually very close to him as well. He's quite vigilant about the goings-on in our street. He often sits on his windowsill outside his house, just enjoying the fresh air and watching the birds. Our houses are all joined together very closely, and they're small, so we can always hear if someone is knocking at somebody else's door. So, this particular day, I was sitting in my living room working on my laptop, and I heard a man screaming on the top of his lungs like something or someone was chasing him. He started banging on my door and shouting frantically, "Let me in." It was so loud and aggressive, in fact, that it felt like my house was shaking. It sounded exactly like my fiancée too, which really spooked me, but my dogs were snarling and growling with their heckles raised, and they'd never be like that about my fiancée. I got up and looked through the peephole in the front door, and strangely, I couldn't see anyone. Neither could I see anyone out of my windows, front side or back. I phoned my fiancé, and he said stay inside and ring Bernard, my next-door neighbour. So I phoned him and told him what had just happened and asked if he'd heard it, and he was really confused. He said that he was out in the street at the time feeding the birds and he didn't hear or see anything. It really shook me up though, because the whole thing just felt so real. I could feel the house shaking and I could see my dogs reacting. I was absolutely terrified, and to this day I have no idea what happened. And maybe I never will. This happened last year, and it still gives me the creeps even thinking about it. I was leaving work and was on my way to my friend's house. My work is on the literal edge of town. It's pretty rural and gets really dead at night. My friends live even further from my work, in where I guess you'd consider to be the country area, and the roads get more and more desolate the closer you get to the house. And I clocked out of work one day and went to my car and called my friend to talk to her on the phone about something while I drove to her and her boyfriend's house. I looked both ways before I exited the parking lot, but there was absolutely nobody else on the road that I could see, which was a pretty good distance. I made it a mile or so down the road when I see headlights behind me and coming up fast. It was a full-size pickup truck that had been lifted, and he got so close to my car that all I could see out of my back window was the Chevy badge on his grille. I thought that he wanted to pass me, so I waved out the window for him to pass using the suicide lane since the road was only 2 lanes there. But instead, he started laying on his horn. Mind you, I'm not a slowpoke driver. I was already doing 55 in a 45, so it's not like I was inconveniencing him with my speed or anything. I tell my friend what's happening, and she tells me to just keep going and that he'll probably leave me alone eventually. But he stays glued behind me for at least another mile or so, occasionally honking some. Eventually, he started turning his brights on for a few seconds, and then he started slowing down until we were a couple of 100 feet apart. And then he would floor it up to fly up behind me really fast like he was feigning rear-ending me. I'm getting more sketched out at this point, and my friend is trying to calm me down and telling me to just keep driving. I'm really scared, though, that he's going to hit me, and I wanted to get away, but there was no businesses open that lay this far out of the city. In fact, there wasn't really any places to be open anymore, just fields and some houses every now and then. I decided to floor it and try to outrun him, figuring my Corolla might not be a Formula 1 car, but surely as hell it's a lot quicker than an old pickup truck, and I could get some distance. I got up to 85 and keep an eye on him, and he didn't seem to be trying to catch up. I felt a little safer and assumed that he'd given up, so I dropped back down to like 60 and informed my friend that it worked and he was done. I still had tunnel vision from the adrenaline, and I didn't realize, though, that he was flying up behind me again until he was barreling towards me, doing probably 85 or 90. I realized that he wasn't going to slow down, so I braced myself for the impact and told my friend that he was about to rear-end me, but instead, he cut around me, missing my car just by a few inches, and flew in front of me. He cut right in front of my car and slammed on his brakes, trying to get me to rear-end him instead. I was able to stop in time, and he started slowly continuing forward. He repeatedly stopped in the road for a few miles, almost like he was baiting me to pass him. My friend told me that her boyfriend was on the phone with the police and was keeping them updated, and for me to stay on the phone with her as long as I could. After a while, I could see my friend's street sign, and she kept assuring me that her and her boyfriend were outside waiting for me to pull in and that the cops were on their way. She also told me to pull into the driveway and stay in the car until they were sure that he was gone. He made what should have been a 10-second drive to the street a painstaking process because he kept stopping in front of me. And the next part was my fault, because I instinctively turned on my blinker, which let him know that I was about to turn onto the road. And so, he immediately whipped up the curb to cut in front of me again. My friend's house is on the corner, so her and her boyfriend were able to see everything now, but I had a bit of a ways to go before I actually got into a driveway. The truck stayed put in the middle of the road this time, and he wasn't moving, so I tried to go around him. As soon as I started to pass him, he floored it and cut to the left, nearly hitting my front end and blocking the road completely. I was feeling braver now, though, that I knew help was on the way and my friends were there, so I laid on my horn, yelled some choice words, and told him to move his ass. My friend and her boyfriend had gotten to the edge of the property where we were by then, and I guess the driver took notice of them and slowly started moving out of my way. I pulled into a driveway as fast as I could, and I looked out the rearview mirror to see him slowly driving up to a driveway where he stopped. I couldn't see his facial features because it was so dark, and he was kind of far away too, but I could tell that he was staring at me the whole time. My friends had gotten to my car just as he got to the driveway, and I watched my friend approach the truck. I heard her say, "You need to leave now, the cops are on their way." and they stared at each other for a few seconds before he slowly just continued on. Her neighborhood is a giant loop, and he never exited, so we felt adventurous and sneaked around the block in search of where he went while we waited on the cops. We found the truck parked at a house and returned just as the police arrived. We told the cops where the truck was, and the officer returned informing us that there was no answer at the door and he must have left. Her boyfriend, who had lived there forever, nor his mother recognized the truck or the man, and if I recall, his mother even knew the people who lived in that house the truck was parked at. And as far as I'm aware, he was never seen again. Now, because I'm a very small female who was alone at almost midnight, we all assumed that he watched me leave work and was trying to bully me into wrecking my car so that I would pull over and he could potentially abduct me or something. We think that once he realized the cops were involved, he parked the truck in someone's otherwise empty driveway and likely left it there to hide in a nearby field until the cops left the area. I bought a house that was built in 1880. When I had it inspected, the inspector said that there had been a fire at some point, probably a long time ago, because there were signs on the bricks of the fireplace in the attic. So we moved in. The first night there, woke up to children screaming out of my sleep. I didn't think much of it because I was in bed, so maybe a dream, right? But fast forward to another 2 months later, 4 of my friends and I were in the dining room and my bedroom smoke detector goes off. I run up the stairs and it stops. This happens 3 times, and finally I creep up the stairs and take off the ceiling and pull the batteries out. Everyone was really weirded out by this. Strange electrical stuff keeps happening. Lights on, TV on, stuff like that. Then about a month later, I was in bed in the middle of the night and the smoke detector in the basement started going off. But there was definitely no smoke. And at this point, I must admit that I was a little bit scared. I wanted to do research on the house, but come to find out that the town's historical records were burned in a fire. But my last straw was falling asleep and my dog waking me up barking at the wall. And the old door handle that you have to click in clicked open, and the door slowly opened by itself. It's been 10 years, and I want to reach out to the new owners to see if they're experiencing the same things that I did. Because I'm pretty confident that that house is haunted. I'm honestly still shook up, so sorry if this is just kind of all over the place. And I'm really not sure where to start, in fact, so that doesn't help either. I guess that I'll just say everything, meaning that this might be pretty long. So when I was a child, I absolutely believed in ghosts, and the idea of them actually fascinated me. But as I got older, seeing shows on TV or videos on the internet that were clearly fake, or extremely suspicious at least, turned me into a non-believer, or at most, very skeptical. Now I'm 21 and just moved out of my uncle's place into my own apartment. It's a very old building, 100 plus years old. It's a pretty large house that's been turned into a fourplex. It even has a historical building plaque outside on it, though I'm having trouble finding any of the info on it. 3 of the 4 apartments were just remodeled this year. The one that wasn't hasn't been because it was occupied at the time. At the moment, it's just me and him in the building, and I'm on the top floor on one side and he's on the other side, ground floor. I've been here for almost a week now. Of course, I've heard your generic old building noises like creaks and snaps from the cooling and falling temperatures, that sort of thing. There was a couple of times in the first 2 days that I could have sworn that I saw movement at the corner of my eye, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, all seemed fairly well, until the night before last. So I was in bed watching YouTube on my phone, lying down, not quite on my back, not quite on my side either, holding up my phone kind of. My arms eventually got tired though, and as I was setting down my phone on my bed, I swear to you that from behind where I was just holding up my phone, a very, very faint shadowy head or face was there and quickly ducked out of view. Now, I realize that that sounds absolutely terrifying, but I was really tired and was just staring directly in the bright screen of my phone. And what I saw was very, very faint, so I figured if I had actually saw something, it must have been just a minor hallucination or a trick of the eye or something. I slept well and got up and went to work, came home and relaxed for a few hours in a very good mood, took a shower, got into bed, fell asleep between 2 or 2:30 in the morning, and I woke up at some point between 3:30 and 4. It's usual for me to wake up many times in a night. I turned to lie on my right side and I stretched a bit and I just lie there for about 5 or 10 minutes. At this point, I'm absolutely wide awake, the night is still and silent, and I get to the point where it's time to flip over, and as I do, the unthinkable happens. Because, as clear as day, from the side that I'm flipping over to, not any more than 7 feet away from me, a female voice at normal conversation volume says something. In my absolute shock and disbelief, I didn't fully catch what she said. I'm pretty sure it was 3 syllables or words, the first of which I'm fairly certain was he's. At this point, obviously I'm horrified and just start shaking, sweating, and on the verge of crying, because this voice was incredibly clear and felt real. And that, I can tell you with absolute certainty that she must have been in her mid-20s, and that it had originated from 5.5 feet from the floor. Also, in all honesty, it didn't feel like what she said was actually directed at me. I couldn't tell you why, but it just really seemed to me like she was answering somebody else's question about me, or perhaps it wasn't about me at all. I don't know. Once I got my courage back, though, I tried as hard as I possibly could to recreate what I heard. I thought that my bed had just made a noise that my brain had somehow recognized as female human speech. But I could not for the life of me get my bed to make a noise that sounded even remotely similar to it, let alone even close to as loud as she spoke. I've also had sleep paralysis many times, and I can assure you that this was not it. Like I said, I was completely 100% awake. Also, I didn't think about it at first, but the side of the room the voice came from is the same side of the room that I thought that I may have seen that slight shadowy head figure the night before. I'm still in shock, and I'm not sure if I'm crazy or what the heck's going on. All I know for sure is that I have never, ever had anything like that happen in my life before. If you've listened this far, then I applaud you, and very much appreciate it too. And if you've ever experienced something like this, then I would love to hear about it. I want to know that I'm just not going insane. Also, my mum gave me a voice recorder, and I don't know how long it can record at a time, but I might just see if I can have it record as I sleep all night. If anything comes back, I'll be sure to let you guys know. The story took place over the last 3 months, having ended less than a month ago. In the final 2 weeks, things took a dramatic turn that I'm still trying to fully process. So 3 months ago, my roommate Chloe and I moved into a perfect apartment in a 6-unit building on a street that we immediately fell in love with. Chloe and I are both in our early 20s who moved from a small town to a major city in the last 5 years, so we felt like real adults living in this space. Within the first couple of weeks, we began to suspect that we were in close proximity of an ongoing domestic dispute between the tenants in the unit upstairs. At this time, we hadn't seen or met them, so really had no idea the context of the relationship. A man's loud, angry ranting, with no shortage of aggressively insulting comments, responded by inaudible mumbles, prompted us to think that a woman may be in a potentially violent environment. Chloe and I decided that we would try to listen in case things ever escalated too far, and maybe try to offer the woman help in the meantime. Oh, that is, if we actually ever met her. Over the next 6 weeks, we continued to hear him, but we hadn't seen anyone, and there were no real developments. When he was really loud, we had tried to record him on our phones, and one Sunday afternoon, I was home alone just cleaning my kitchen, which was at the back of our unit. The man upstairs was having a very loud and long rant, and for the first time, I heard a clear response. I could make out a woman's voice telling him to shut up, leave her alone, in an almost annoyed rather than fearful tone. He didn't appreciate that, and began yelling at her, which eventually led him to banging something against his floor. Eventually, he did one so hard that my kitchen lights began to flicker, and I could see debris falling from the ceiling. This definitely freaked me out, and I called my boyfriend Ted. When Ted answered, I whispered into the phone, "Don't say anything, just listen." The man upstairs continued to yell, but it wasn't until there was another bang that Ted could hear. I said into the phone, "That's my upstairs neighbor. He's been going on like this for a long time. I've been trying to record some of it." But here is where the story really takes a turn. Considering how clearly that we could hear him upstairs, it makes sense that he could make out what was being said below him. All 6 units were connected by a stairway outside at the back of the building, and I heard very loud steps running down. Next thing I know, there are 3 heavy raps on my back door and an angry, "So you can record my conversations but you can't answer the door." I was instantly paralyzed and worried that he would come by the open window where I was standing. After about 20 seconds, I heard the steps return upstairs and that familiar voice call up, "No one's home." I collected myself from the shock and the fear of what just happened, and left my apartment to make some calls. I decided to phone my landlord first, as he seemed like he would actually want to know if we were having issues with another tenant, and I was very confused about what was actually happening. I told him the chronology of the events since moving in, and he provided me with some very interesting information. The tenants above us were a mother and a son, Rita and Ivan. Ivan is 36, and he and his mother had been living in the building for 10 years. During that time, Ivan had never had a job, and in the last couple of years had caused some problems for the landlord. Specifically, him and the previous tenant of our unit, who had moved out over a year ago, had butt heads several times, which was why the landlord had decided not to mention anything to us. He knew that Ivan had issues and assumed that it was an isolated or contained issue. But the last thing the landlord told me was that while the previous tenant was in our unit, Ivan had approached him, accusing her of installing something in his wall to listen to him. Maybe I'm dense, but this didn't really set off immediate alarms. Something more serious was going on with Ivan for sure, though. Of that I was pretty confident. But I was still believing that the woman's voice that I heard belonged to someone in danger, so I called the city non-emergency police line, who sent a car over to make sure that she was safe. She was, and then they promptly left. After our call, the landlord began to build a case to evict my upstairs neighbours, on the grounds that they were impeding on other tenants' ability to enjoy their space. Things upstairs had been mostly quiet for 2 days, until I was in touch with the landlord again over the phone. He provided me with more information, specifically that he believed when Ivan was ranting, it was towards the previous occupant of our unit, rather than Rita. This obviously seemed odd to me, but we were still trying to piece everything together, so we had to keep an open mind. The landlord also reiterated how Ivan had really changed in the past couple of years and had caused problems before. His reasoning for not giving us the heads up before moving in was that since the last tenant had moved out, he'd just been quiet and kept to himself. In the days after this call, the ranting started up again, and as we waited for an update on the eviction process, that Friday, we received confirmation that Rita and Ivan had been served with their first warning of eviction, so we expected to hear some action. And sure enough, that night while I was in bed, I heard Ivan's voice from above say, "Shush, I'm trying to listen." At this point, I'm definitely concerned, but really had no idea where this was going, and just how quickly. The next evening, Chloe called me while I was at work to tell me that she thought that she heard a knock at our back door. I told her that I wouldn't be home for a couple of hours, but if she was concerned, I could leave early, or she could call the non-emergency line. Chloe told me that she was going to see if anything happened and that she would be okay. Around 10 p.m. I came home, and by midnight, I was on the phone with non-emergency myself because Ivan had come downstairs to my back window where I was standing, asking us to leave him alone because we were harassing him. Chloe and I had been in our kitchen talking about our days, having agreed that we were going to try and live our lives despite the situation. At one point, the subject of upstairs briefly came up, and the next thing that I knew, the man that I had only ever physically seen once with long, dark, greasy hair and a look of just emptiness in his eyes, was standing at my back window next to where I was sitting. My immediate response was to pull out my phone and start recording him. "Yeah, you can record me," he said. "Can you leave me alone? You and your friends harass my home every day." This got my adrenaline going, and suddenly I heard myself call back, "Bye." I called the police, and we waited for them to arrive. When he went back upstairs, though, he started ranting to Rita and said some very weird and unsettling things. He said that we were sexually harassing him and that us, the landlord and previous tenant, were all associated. He then mentioned the bat that we had beside our back door, which he wouldn't have been able to see at the window, therefore had to have listened to us mention it. He also knew my name, having only ever seen me once. The police arrived, though, and essentially told us that there was nothing that they could do. Surprise, surprise, right? They knocked on Ivan and Rita's door, but no one answered, and they just stayed silent. The officers advised us to go to the station the following day and have a specific officer assigned to check in on us and kind of monitor everything. They left, and I called my boyfriend to come and stay over for the night. In the hour after the police left, Ivan ranted sporadically, repeating much of the same things that we had been hearing in the past week. Ted came over, and he heard for himself what was going on and agreed that it was very unsettling. Banging came from upstairs, and Ted said that he was going to go back out for a smoke, and that if Ivan came outside, to call 911. Ted had injured his back the previous week and was concerned Ivan was going to try and come downstairs again, so he brought the baseball bat with him. Minutes later, Ivan had come outside and was standing at the top of the stairs, yelling that he was going to knock us out. He started coming down the stairs when Ted picked up the bat, telling Ivan to stay upstairs. I called 911, and our downstairs neighbor came outside to help us, having heard commotion. The police arrived, and I experienced some of the saddest minutes of my life, because, for starters, when the police went upstairs this time, Rita answered and completely defended her son. The woman that we had initially been concerned was at the receiving end of domestic abuse, told the officers that we were not leaving her son alone and that he had almost been attacked by my boyfriend. The police said that there was nothing that they could do and left us for what felt like bait in order for our concerns to be taken seriously. They left, and we heard Ivan amp up again, this time saying that he was going to kill those bitches downstairs. So we just packed up and we left for the night, each staying with a friend. I must admit that was a tough night, as we both came to realize that this apartment that we had thought was so perfect had a very fatal flaw, and we had no idea how this was going to end. But we met up the following day, and after encouragement from our families, we went to the police station needing real help with a potentially dangerous situation. It was eventually arranged that charges were to be placed on Ivan for uttering death threats. Chloe and I each gave a testimony, and the officers told us that they'd be going to the apartment to arrest Ivan. They advised us not to stay there for the night if possible in case he refused to be taken by them, as this could escalate things. Without a warrant, though, the police had no way of forcing Ivan to go with them, but I had a feeling that he would, since I had heard him at one point mention that he was the one protecting their home. Sure enough, when the police came to the building while we were packing overnight bags, Ivan let them take him away, despite his mother's protest, which included accusing us of lying and threatening them. We packed up our things, though, and watched him get taken away, and we left, never spending another night at that apartment. Since all of this, there have been a few updates, though. First of all, we moved, and the landlord was very generous in his reimbursement to us, having known that Ivan had issues and that he greatly underestimated them. Aside from not wanting to be sued, I really believe the landlord to be a good guy who just made a judgment call that was completely wrong. We've received a few updates on legal proceedings, both from the charges that were pressed and landlord's eviction process of Rita and Ivan. Ivan was released the following day on bail with a number of conditions, and we're waiting for a court date, I guess. The landlord is also waiting for a court date, having filed all the pre-required documents. The final piece to this complete bizarre sequence of events, though, was the Facebook profile that we found, having looked him up on kind of a whim. Ivan hadn't posted in 3 years, which lined up with the timeline when the landlord said that he began causing problems. But he had some really unsettling posts that we provided to the police, in addition to a frequent mention of a relationship that he was in. He has dozens of posts about this person with no response, including likes on any of it. It's just strictly posts made to an anonymous person who had no interactions, nor did anyone else. Having researched what I believe Ivan is suffering from, I'm curious if this relationship ever existed in the first place, or if it was just another delusion of his. In the end, we obviously got out okay, which is great, but things definitely could have gone just a whole lot worse. So I was 12 and was staying at home babysitting my younger brother, 7. I say babysitting, but it was more like I had an excuse to sit downstairs and play my GameCube uninterrupted on the family TV while I let my brother stay up late playing on a DS in his bedroom. Both my parents were working, with my dad away for most of the week in Finland and my mother working in town on a few social inclusion youth work projects. But anyway, I'm happily downstairs just playing away, Metroid Prime 2. I was completely addicted to the Metroid games back then, when I hear a laugh. It wasn't like some sort of sinister or villainous laugh or some kid giggling. It literally sounded like a man who had just met his boss after a meeting giving a kind of forced, trying to be nice, but I don't think you're funny laugh. This sounded like it came initially from the corridor just adjacent to the lounge, and initially when I heard it, I just sort of shrugged it off and continued playing the game. But my brother Elliot then wanders down the stairs. Being the older, and clearly mad with power, I pause the game, turn around and tell him that he's supposed to be staying silent in his bedroom and playing his DS. So that way, if our mum comes home, she won't know that he's up, and I won't get chewed out for letting him stay up past his bedtime. Elliot's confused though and says that he's had headphones in and came down to ask if the laugh had come from the TV, as it was clearly loud enough to make him stop what he was doing. And at that point, we hear the exact same laugh again, pretty much identical to the first. So, there we are, not knowing what to do, weirded out, but at this stage, not terrified per se. Being the older brother and realizing Elliot was beginning to freak out though, I figured now is the time to start establishing what the hell is going on, because at this point, I can't fully discern where this noise is actually coming from, as it seems to be kind of all around us, but surely it's just coming from like a household electronic or something. The first thing I do is turn off the TV volume, and we heard the laugh again. There's a cabinet in the house dining room that has some cheap, dumb pound store, I guess dollar store for the Americans, Halloween crap in it, like those plushy heads that when you hit them, they have pre-recorded sounds in them. One is a vampire, which I know for a fact has a cheesy laugh. We find it, try it, completely different noise, which is distorted and crackly anyway. And of course, we then hear the laugh again. Elliot now is not the only one panicking, because I am too. My dad had an office with the family PC, so next I go in there to see if it's the computer. Computer is on, but the only set of speakers in the room are off. No other television sets, and Elliot's DS has been switched off, and we still hear the exact same laugh seemingly around us again, and again, and again at random intervals. Elliot's now crying, and I'm shaking. Neither of us know what the hell is happening. The practical part of my brain that was saying this has to be a speaker has accepted now that something weird is going on. I rack my brain for anything that would make sense in this scenario, and then it hits me. Our grandfather had died about 6 months prior to this night. My dad, while not religious, had been brought up in an extremely religious Irish Catholic family, so he kept little laminated cards from funerals on the same cabinet in the dining room. I don't know if that's weird or not, but hey, that's what it is. Anyway, He had almost like a little shrine, I guess you could call it. One of his mother, one of his best friend, and one in more recent times, one of his father, our grandfather. So, there I am, talking to this piece of lamented card, asking Grandad, are you there? Can you give us a sign? That kind of crap. There was no immediate response, but still, the same laugh maybe a minute later. By this point, we're completely freaking out, so we go to the kitchen and we get a knife. In hindsight, no, I have no idea what good a knife would have done against a seemingly incorporeal laugh, but, I mean, what the hell else am I supposed to do? My brother's bawling his eyes out, and I'm way out of my depth. And we go to the stairs and we start moving up them, trying desperately to figure out if someone was in the house or if the sound is coming from a room or anything really. But still, the same damn laugh, not coming from anywhere in particular, just all around, erupts again. By this point, we're out on the front porch in the middle of November, freaking our minds out with a kitchen knife in hand. Our house was at the end of the street, so no, nobody approached us before you ask. We were out there for a bit to calm down, but obviously freezing, so we went back inside. The moment that we did, right on cue, we get that same laugh again. To be quite frank, we were just done. There's tears, panicking, and we were just both done. Then, Mum finally gets home. She walks through the door to see the scene of her two sons, shaking and crying and trying desperately to explain to her what's happened. To our credit, we did try and we did a pretty good job, but the moment we did, she pretty quickly dismissed the entire thing. There was no more laugh, too, no more feeling of being watched or like there was a presence, and it was just over and done with, just like that. And it hasn't happened since then. Now, a lot of years have passed, and this would have been back in 2004 and 2005. I'm now 28 and Elliot is 23, to give you a bit of an idea. But about a year ago, I came down from where I'm currently living with my fiancée to give a carers talk at a local college that I did some work at. My mother and stepfather were out of town and it was just me and Elliot. My father has since sadly passed away. I gave the talk, met my best friend's son for the first time and asked if he'd be my best man, then met with my brother back at the same home that we'd grown up in where he was house sitting. We were chilling and making some dinner and possibly abusing the liquor cabinet, I'll admit that. But we get talking and the subject of that night comes up. I wanted Elliot to relay it to me to kind of see if things added up. And sure enough, he gives me the same story after not talking about it for well over a decade, beat for beat. I asked if since then if he'd ever heard the laugh again, to which he said no. But on nights where he and his friends had slept over and cramped out downstairs, they had the exact same feeling of someone just being there, and on multiple occasions, even saw black shapes right outside the glass adjacent to the front door. I obviously can't attest to this myself, but I did share the original experience with my brother, so I see no reason to really doubt him. Strangely though, this wasn't an old house. It was newly built along with the rest of the street in 1990. To the best of my knowledge, it wasn't built on some ancient battleground or Halloween grave or some ancestral thing. There were no mishaps during the construction of the place or anything like that either. I mean, literally, nothing's happened here. And nothing really happened after that, other than what my brother told me years to come. So, I don't have an explanation for any of this, other than what happened just happened. Anyway, I apologize if this has been a bit long, but I just wanted to get it off my chest. So my story starts a few weeks back. I'm not exactly a light sleeper, but I've always seemed to wake easily when my so-called security has been breached, as my friends like to say, i.e. bedroom door opens, sounds outside of my room or even in the house, or my spidey senses go off that something just isn't right. About 4 weeks ago, I was jolted awake around 4:45 in the morning to something either being thrown at the end of my bed or someone kicking it, and then shortly thereafter, my phone fell off my bed. Now, I sleep alone in the middle of a king-size bed that I normally fall asleep to watching something on my phone, so there is no way that it just happened to fall off the side. But it was a weird one-off, so I just dismissed it as not a big deal. But earlier this week, I woke up at about 2:15 in the morning. I tossed and turned, being unable to fall back to sleep or get comfortable. I turned onto my left side and tried to count sheep, and then I feel something coming up from behind me. With me being on my left side, my back faces a wall to the back of my room, so I knew that it wasn't a person. And in a moment, my ear starts to just burn red hot. I start to hear almost what I would say is a radio static and voices talking. Voices were clear and speaking in English, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The sound seems to be swaying back and forth over my ear. After a few gut-wrenching moments, I feel the edge of my bed dip down very near my face, repeatedly as if someone is pulling it down with 2 fingers. I kept my eyes shut and tried my best to control my breathing, for what seemed like ages. I couldn't keep it regular though, and had to breathe rather hard. And then it just stopped. And I know this is going to sound weird, but I felt like I could feel it walk away out of my room. I lay there for what seemed like about an hour, utterly petrified. I didn't even dare open my eyes with some sort of a light on. I called out for Siri. Silly, I know, but it was the only thing that I could think of. And I opened my eyes. And nothing. I turned my bedroom light on and proceeded into the bathroom to vomit my brains out because of how scared I was. And I slept with my bedroom light on for the rest of the night. Since that night, I've slept with my closet light on. I've woken up once more this week to the end of my bed being hit or moved again, but it was very light that time. I'm hoping that it may just be my mother coming home for the holidays, as this year is the first full year that she's been gone. But nothing like this has ever happened to me. I live in a fairly new house too, which is strange. Only one previous family who owned it, so I have no idea what's going on. Have any of you had anything similar happen to yourselves? Or are you able to shine some light on my experience? For context, I'm a girl and I was about 23 years old when this event took place. At the time, I used to work at a high-end retirement community as a concierge for the front desk. I had the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, and my duties, among others, included answering all the incoming phone calls from current residents, their family members, and people interested in moving into the place. On a typical night, the residents were done with dinner and other activities by about 9 p.m. Almost all of them went in their apartments by that time, turning in for the night. The night of the incident was typically quiet. I was reading a book at the desk and waiting for the 11 p.m. concierge to arrive. It must have been around 10 p.m. when the phone started ringing. The caller ID just said unknown, and this happens sometimes, so there wasn't a red flag or anything. I answered with the standard greeting. "Hello, this is so-and-so. Thank you for calling. How may I assist you?" The caller was a man, had a mature-sounding voice. I'd say he must have been middle-aged. And he said, "Hi, I'm calling for my mother. I'm interested in seeing your place and getting information." I proceeded to tell him the few selling points that I was allowed to share, the level of care, independent living, assisted living, memory care. They included meals, transportation, activities, nursing staff available 24/7, etc. At first, he wasn't pleasant, but somehow the conversation just took a weird turn. He said something along the lines of, "I took my mother to get her pedicure done today. Do you like having pedicures?" Perplexed, I responded that I did, and that we also had an in-house salon that offered pedicures and other services, attempting to steer the conversation back on track. He continued, "She's right here, wiggling her feet in her sandals. Here, listen." Then came a sound of something wet and kind of squeaky, like when you go to the beach and your feet are wet, and you put on rubber flip-flops. Quite honestly, I didn't know what to respond with. The man said, "Did you hear that? She's so cute with her toes painted red in her little sandals." I was a bit disturbed, and I wanted the call to end, but sometimes calls are just randomly recorded, and I didn't want to get in trouble for hanging up on a prospective sale. So I continued on the phone and offered the phone number to the marketing department, asking him to call during business hours. Eventually, I was able to hang up. The 11 p.m. concierge arrived, and we had a laugh about the whole conversation. I went home and returned back to work the next day. That night, at around 10 p.m. again, came the call from the same guy, and this time he said, "Hi, I have more questions about your community." I asked if he had called marketing earlier, and he said no, and that he preferred to talk to me since I was so pleasant. I still didn't want to hang up for fear of getting in trouble, and they were very strict about the marketing calls. He then started talking again about pedicures and the same squeaky sound coming through the phone, but in the background this time. He asked, "What color are your toes painted?" and I lost it. I just hung up on him, and that was that. 2 seconds later, though, the phone rings again. Unknown caller. And sighing, I answered it on the off chance that it was another unknown caller. Boy, was I naive. It was pedicure guy, and he was angry. He started screaming that he would call the director in the morning and have a talk with him about my inappropriate behavior. I lied and said, "Go ahead. You know the calls are recorded, don't you? So the director will be able to review the call himself." It was silent for 2 seconds, and then I heard the click. He hung up. The following night, he called again, and I answered, of course, and he apologized for yelling, said that he was still interested in bringing his mother to look at the place, and asked for the number to the marketing again. I gave it to him, and that was that. The following night I was off, but when I returned back to work 2 nights later, the receptionist that I was relieving gave me the messages from an unknown caller. Apparently, he had called a couple of times over the weekend at 10 p.m. and asked to speak with me only. He asked when my shifts were and insisted that he only wanted to talk to me since I was so pleasant. I was pretty spooked at this point, so I went to the director's office and explained what was happening. We tried to listen to the recording of the calls, but as it turns out, the machine automatically did not record calls from unknown numbers. From that point on, for about a month, I was terrified that the unknown caller would show up at my workplace. He could easily Google the address, and he already knew most of my schedule. Of course, I didn't take calls from unknown callers anymore with the okay from the director at that point, and apparently he called one night that I was off and was transferred to the director's cell phone per his request. I don't know the details of the conversation. The director wouldn't tell me, but I do know that unknown caller stopped calling altogether after that point. And so, whoever he was, I just hope that he stays away from that place. So for context, my house is in a small town with multiple large forests. It's not unusual to see strange things happening around here, such as drug addicts and other odd people in the forest. My bedroom is on the bottom floor of the house, facing the forest, with only a small fence blocking off the forest. It sounds bad, but honestly, it's pretty safe, really. Trust me. So, last night, I was unable to sleep. It was 2 a.m. and I was playing Persona 5. A brilliant game, by the way. But my room was pitch black, apart from the screen, and silent apart from the game. Then suddenly, I hear scratching at my window. I was freaked out at first, but realized it must be my neighbor's cat, Damien. Odd name. And sure enough, Damien is at my window, but he's strangely silent, unlike usual. He kept scratching and scratching for 30 seconds at least. I was concerned, but I just kind of ignored him. I turned around and went back to playing my game, and that was when I felt just this overwhelming fear and cold aura which I still can't explain. Similar to when someone is behind you and you can feel them being there, like the sixth sense or something. I looked into the mirror in my room because it's kind of just a habit to do that when I'm anxious, and Damien was now gone from the window. I looked back at my screen, and not even 20 seconds passed when I hear a faint meow. But not a meow as in the noise, but as if someone had actually said it in a high voice. I looked back out the window, and Damien was back, and he stared at me and then smiled, kind of just like a human would. I was really weirded out by this, and so I shut my blinds and turned off my PS4, and I just hid in my bed. I was up for hours just kind of thinking about the event before I finally fell asleep. When I woke up, I kind of forgot about it, and when I did recall it, all I thought was, wow, what a weird dream. But then, just 5 minutes before I actually started writing this, I spotted a small bird in my garden. I thought that it was cute, and I looked out at it, and that's when I noticed Damien's footprints exactly where he sat last night. I freaked out at this, and I decided to share this because, well, it's the only comfort that I have at the moment. I'm always up late, and I've never hallucinated before, so I don't know what it was. I don't have a tendency to imagine such horrifying things either, and it was just truly a traumatic experience for me. I can't explain what happened and why it even happened, but I think I'll be sleeping with my blinds shut. When I started 7th grade, I started hanging out with the meanest kids in school. All my childhood friends changed when we entered middle school. The cliques began to form, and suddenly, the kids that I knew since kindergarten didn't want to be my friend anymore. So, I took up with the bad kids. There was a whole clan of them, and half of them were family. The ones that were related all lived in what we called a hollow, though I now call it the Rattlesnake Den when or if I drive past it. Hollow folk are just not to be trusted, and if you're from a small rural area, you know what I'm talking about. These kids were ranging in age from 9 to 12th grade, but they were always in trouble, getting suspended, getting detention, defying authority, and they just looked like a bunch of punks. I'd always been a good kid, but a lot of things changed in this era for me. My mum actually married a human-shaped leech around the same time who was both verbally and emotionally abusive to me. My brother and sister were estranged by that point because of said leech. My mum didn't ever seem to have time for me and my problems anymore. She was always a single parent up until this point in my life, but honestly, not a good one. So, taking up with a bunch of angry kids made me feel better. And soon, I started doing some really bad things too. One of the Holler kids in this family was my age though, and she and I became best frenemies. So to escape my reality, I tried to spend as much time at her house as well as I possibly could. I hated it though, because those people live like animals, but it was better than going home. As a side note too, there are other terrifying experiences from this same time period, like the time her grandmother held me hostage for 3 days when I was about 13, but I digress. Her older cousins, specifically the one we called P-Bob, would often bounce around the holler from house to house, probably out of boredom. P-Bob was about 17 or maybe even 18 at the time, and it seemed that once he had found out that I was spending a lot of time at her house, he came around more and more. I can recall one specific time too when I first realized that I was afraid of this guy. Frenemy and I were camping in the yard. Our camping trip basically consisted of us setting up an old worn-out tent off to the side of their Dust Bowl property, taking a radio and some off-brand pop, and staying in the tent until it got too cold at around 3 or 4 a.m. It sucked a bit because she left me out there by myself that night, but that's neither here or there. But probably at around 10 or 11 that night, I think, P-Bob and another cousin snuck up on our tent and scared us. P-Bob was a big boy too. He was fat, but he also lifted weights, and I remember he had a head just like a bull, and he always had the most condescending look on his face. Some of the other boys, all of which were older, were actually really nice, and I really considered them my friends. Spoiler though, they weren't really my friends, but we'll get to that. P-Bob, however, was just always aloof. He was never not a smartass unless he was raging about something. Sometimes when I'd be at my friend's house, I could hear him in his mum's house next door screaming his guts out at her. He had a little sister too, who he was unabashedly abusive of. I even once saw him slap her, no holds barred. Like, it was a full-on hard slap, and she was probably 8 or 9, maybe younger. He was also allegedly sexually abusive of her, but that's not my story to tell. I just remember being afraid to get out of the tent that night while People was there. But like that old thing was really going to protect me anyway. But he was being sexually derogative, if there's such a thing, He was badgering me, but doing it in a way that made it come across as just him kind of being comedic. He said something to me about going to another one of his cousin's house and having sex with me on a kitchen counter, though his version of this statement was far more colourful and terrifying. I had no idea how to react, if I'm being honest, so I caught an attitude with him and started trying to berate him right back, even going so far as to threaten him. I was completely full of crap, but I was an angry kid and had no idea how else to handle this situation. But to skip ahead, there were dozens of other awful encounters with him over the next year or so. He grabbed me one day at school and tried to throw me down a flight of concrete stairs, all the while trying to sneak a feel of various parts of my body. When I said something about it to Frenemy, she just belittled me and told me that I was retarded and that he was only being funny. She was a very cruel and hateful person, and I mean, they all were, really. By 8th grade, though, these friends had really changed me as a person, and not for the better. Through me, P-Bob was introduced to a girl whom I frequently argued and spattered with, named Lorelei. She was a cocky transfer from the hood in Ohio, and she and I hated each other immediately, so we fought often, but never physical. Long story short, she met P-Bob because of one of her arguments, and the two of them started dating. Toward the end of the school year, they broke up, and I was oblivious to this, as the only conversations I ever had with this girl were limited to giving her shit and her giving it right back. Until one day, she made a comment about me causing her and P-Bob to break up. Now, I most certainly had nothing to do with that, but I felt that she was an imbecile, so I just kind of laughed it off. The end of the school day came, and we all loaded on the bus. By this point, I had made a new friend who was also friends with the Bad Holler kids, Tasha, and she was coming to my house for the weekend. We sat down near the back of the bus and we waited to leave, when I noticed P-Bob got on the bus and he immediately locked eyes with me and commenced giving me the dirtiest look that I've ever seen. If looks could kill, right? He sat down in the seat behind me and Tasha. The bus finally took off, and we made it out to Route 7 and almost to Dr. Branch's Road, so about 3 to 5 miles before he really started just badgering me. I don't remember everything that he said, but for many years I did. In fact, for years following this event, I'd hear his words on a loop and experience the attack just over and over in my mind. It's taken a long time to stop thinking about it, so honestly, I'm glad that I don't remember it all anymore. But he was saying a lot of horrific stuff, and I mean awful stuff to me, sick stuff, like threats and whatnot, and I was terrified, but I was more so humiliated. He also said something about me breaking him and Lorelei up, and I called him a player, and I had never heard that word before that day, but all my kid friends were laughing at me. Tasha was too. This was one of the few times in my life where I truly lost my ability to speak, so I sat there without saying a word, and just occasionally glanced at him to gauge the emotion on his face. He had now switched seats and was across from us, and we were about another 6 miles from the drop-off when he leaned over to Tasha and told her to move back to another seat, which she did without hesitation, and he jumped into the seat with me. He continued attacking me, so I put my face against the bus window and tried to scoot as far to the corner as I could. And I guess that my refusal to pay attention to him could be what escalated the situation. But the next thing I know, he's got my head in a vice grip within his arms, and he's simultaneously strangling me and crushing my face. Keep in mind, I was an 8th grader. This guy was supposed to have graduated like a year or two prior, so legally he was an adult. The school bus driver did nothing to stop P-Bob, to which he would later defend by saying that us kids on the back were always doing that kind of stuff, and he didn't think that it was anything out of the ordinary. I hesitate to even tell you, too, that my bus driver was also the father of 2 of the Holler Kid boys, and the freaking sheriff of our town as well eventually. But anyway, so there I am, unable to breathe or scream, but still trying. I slapped, punched, clawed, but he just kept squeezing my head. It felt as if my cheekbones were collapsing, and I don't remember how long this went on, because things got blurry after this, even if it was still fresh in my mind days later. I'm not sure if I remember everything. I do remember, though, that he eventually let go of me, and then hit me a few times, and then tried to strangle me, and I remember at some point seeing everyone, my friends, just laughing at me, but like I said, it's a bit blurry. The next thing I remember after that was standing by the front seats of the bus waiting for it to come to a complete stop and trying with everything in me to hold back my tears. When I got off the bus, I ran straight into the house and to the bathroom to hide. I didn't want my mum to see me and I needed a moment to just kind of gather myself. But the tears were pouring by then and I just couldn't make them stop. My face looked bad, but it got worse over the next few days as bruises tend to get darker as they heal. When I didn't come out of the bathroom for a while, my mum came to the door and asked what was going on. Tasha, who was standing outside the door, I believe in an attempt to draw my mum's attention and force me to tell, started crying and spilling the beans. And yeah, I'm rolling my eyes on that one too, still to this day. My mum forced me to come out of the bathroom. My screaming stepdad got involved and the police were called and I had to pose for what felt like an eternity of police evidence photos. My face looked like it had been put in a washing machine with a bunch of sneakers and my throat was bruised and I was scratched up a little. I was just a complete mess if I'm being honest. So, there's actually a little bit more to this story, but I'm going to stop there because I've taken up enough of your time. P-Bob went to jail over this, by the way, but I actually had no idea that he did until I was in my early or mid-20s. I also never rode the school bus again for the rest of my years at that school, and I rarely ever saw P-Bob in the years after high school, until he sent me a friend request on Facebook in 2017. I've had a lot of strange jobs, but one of the most interesting was working for a tax company based out of Texas. I lived in Kentucky, my home state at the time, but because this company contracted out jobs remotely, I was able to make a very good living for performing tasks which were generally very simple. I had a work partner, but not all the time, and our duty was to travel all over the eastern and central part of the state to county courthouse PBA offices. You might not have those, but it's a small town thing, and research delinquent property taxes. But we were then required to compile a list of properties who had delinquent taxes and submit it to our boss. She was our primary contact in Texas. This part is important too because it was the only reason that we would sometimes have to deal with hostile people. The company would then buy the taxes if the property tickled their fancy, and a letter was issued to the owner of the property stating that they had a certain amount of time to repay the amount. I'm not sure what would happen after that, since that part wasn't my job, but I do know that people immediately assumed, because of a lack of knowledge or understanding of the laws, that this company was going to take their property and throw them out into the streets. Before the company bought the taxes, however, they would send us a backup list of the ones that they were interested in, and we would then go out to the locations, photograph the property, and then submit all the photos to our Texas contact. And this is where things got interesting. Honestly, it was like the property owners just had some kind of a psychic intuition about us. They had no idea who we were or when we were coming, since we worked almost on our own schedule. They didn't know what kind of color of car that we would be in, but yet, somehow, they would frequently burst out of their front doors as we pulled up to shoot photos of the location. This made for some interesting and often frightening confrontations. After getting comfortable with the job, though, I even came up with a convincing story to tell angry property owners when they chased us down with their car. I'd tell them that we're from the County Property Valuation Administration, we're just updating our property files and needed a current photo. This would often de-escalate the situation, and they'd apologize for threatening our lives and sometimes running us off the road to make us pull over. I have a lot of stories from this job, but here is the best one. So we were deep in the hills of eastern Kentucky one day, searching desperately for a single white trailer from our list. We found a holler matching our directions. This is way before the GPS days. We had to use real county maps and all that stuff. And we took a chance. As we drove up the holler, houses began to spread out farther and farther, and soon we were totally isolated. Nothing but trees and a narrow gravel road, when suddenly we spotted the trailer. It didn't look anything like it did in the PBA picture. Time had obviously taken a real toll on this place. Some of you might not understand this depending on where you're from, but around my home state, one grows very accustomed to the look and the feel of a potential location for drug manufacturing. I know, that might not make heaps of sense, but trust me, we knew immediately that this place was a prime location for a meth lab. We didn't spot the trailer until we had driven a little ways past it, so we didn't get a great photo on the way in. And as usual, we decided to drive on by, turn around, and get the shot on the way back. Apparently, though, somebody saw us on the way in. This was a very rural road, and not even a road at this point if I'm being honest, since it had turned to gravel a mile or two back. In fact, I basically had to turn the car by pulling up into an embankment and doing what felt like a 32-point turn to keep from going into a ditch. While I was turning, though, my buddy said, "Hey, look." I looked, and 3 people were walking out of the woods onto the road. Just people, no big deal. I had the car straightened out of the road at this point, and then I noticed that they had weapons. A young, nasty-looking fellow was holding a baseball bat, of all things. A nasty-looking older fellow had a shovel. Both were shirtless, and then there was a screaming girl. Something clicked in my head, and on the drive in, when my partner snapped the photo, I heard a girl screaming. It was an angry scream, but I couldn't make out what was said. I didn't even know where it came from, and I certainly didn't think the scream was directed at us, but apparently it was. These people were now walking with intention toward my stopped car, and I kept thinking, is this really about to happen? And what exactly is happening even? My partner was freaking out a little and convinced me that they were going to attack us. It's hard to explain what is going through your head at this point because I couldn't really believe what I was actually seeing. And in the end, the only thing that I could think was, hit him with the car just like in Grand Theft Auto, otherwise you're about to die. They were screaming and shaking their weapons and closing in, and I was quickly running out of time. I revved the tiny engine in my red Pontiac Grand Prix, hoping to scare them, and then I let off the gas. I plowed toward them with the fury of all 6 cylinders, or 4, however many there are, I don't remember. Luckily for them, they jumped out of the way last minute as I grazed by them, throwing gravel and dirt just everywhere. Once we were a safe distance, I slowed down and I looked back. Luckily, they were gone. Unluckily, we were once again too far from the trailer to get a good photo. I explained this to my boss when I emailed her my day's collection of property photos, and she seemed to understand. And after that, I kept a loaded 45 in my glove box, and felt significantly more confident while doing my job. I actually quit a couple of years later though, because it was just way too dangerous, even if I was packing heat. I work as a nurse in a psychiatric unit, which is conveniently tucked away from the back of an old hospital. I'm on night shift at the moment, and most of the night is spent just trying to convince manic patients to return to their bed. We were having a strangely quiet night. The staff usually sit in the corridor of the intersection between the male and the female sides of the ward. We can hear everything that's going on better from there and intervene quicker if needs be. There's also a shower room located just to the left of where we sit. It has a toilet and a short wall partition separating the shower in the far corner of the room. And as we were sitting there, the door to the shower room just slowly crept open. No big deal though. We got up, closed it again, and went on with the night. But then it happened again about an hour later, and again, and we didn't think too much about it. After closing the door a second time though, we soon heard the sound of running water or something. I got up to check and found the tap in the shower room was running, and I thought it must have been faulty, but when I tried to turn it off, it spun easily and stopped running water. Feeling a little bit freaked out now, I checked around the partition to the shower in case a patient was, somehow hiding there, but when I did, there was no one. But when I turned to walk back out, I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck and heard a sound like gas hissing behind me. I glanced back around and checked the shower, which seemed to work fine, and just assumed that there was trapped air or something. The next night, we were sitting in the same place, and again, it was an unusually quiet night. until around 2 a.m. when we heard a massive bang and then a dull thud, as if something had hit against a wall and then slid to the floor. The noise seemed to be quite close, and we, hurriedly, looked through each dormitory and individual patient room as well, expecting that one of the patients had fallen, but everyone was still sound asleep. Apart from one patient who told us that she had trouble sleeping the last few nights, and asked to watch some television in the sitting room. We continued with our search, but couldn't seem to find anything to explain the sound, and sat back down in the corridor where we started to talk about ghosts and joking about being haunted. The patient who couldn't sleep asked if she could smoke in the toilet. We occasionally let people do this during the night, as we weren't allowed to let them out of the unit after 10 p.m, and trying to tell an avid smoker that they can't have a cigarette is a sure way to start a fight that'll cause everyone to be woken up. So we said that she could have a quick one in the shower room before going back to bed, and she asked for one of us to come with her. When we asked why, she explained, "Because that room freaks me out. There are spirits in there that are trying to come through the mirrors." Now, we had heard stuff like this from patients on a regular basis, so we didn't think too much of it, offered her some reassurance, and I agreed to come into the bathroom with her. While we were in there, she talked about seeing the ghost of a man in her room, which kept her up at night. She then stopped talking abruptly and looked confused before going over to peer around the partition, and I asked her what was wrong, and she shushed me and asked, in a kind of a whisper, if I heard what she heard. I admitted that I couldn't hear anything. Again, it's a common occurrence for people to talk about auditory hallucinations on our ward, but I asked her what she heard. She said that she thought that she heard a dripping sound, but there was no water running, and when she checked behind the partition, she heard a hissing sound. I suggested that she finish a cigarette and get back to bed, and she asked for some medication to calm her down, and then said, "Man, I hate that bathroom. The door opens and closes itself, you know." After she went back to bed, I was telling the other staff about this, and we were joking about how much of a freaky coincidence it all was, and we were all still discussing it when day staff came in. And when the first nurse arrived, she came over to ask how the shift was, and we kind of asked her if she believed in ghosts in a jokey kind of way. She said that she didn't, but she said that she had bad memories of the ward that sometimes freaked her out. She told us that the worst thing she ever saw was 20 years ago when she was doing the hourly checks on the ward once, just to check on each patient every hour to check that they're okay. She couldn't find one of the patients and went into the shower room because she could hear water running in there. She checked around the partition and she found the guy lying dead in a pool of blood in the shower. He had unfortunately hacked himself to death with 2 blades. An obviously very unwell man. The nurse told us that ever since that happened too, a few times she's gone into the shower room and felt a sudden rush of cold air as if someone was trying to run past her. I might have to start looking for a new job. So I was around 10 or 11 years old when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognize some of the red flags. I attended a camp over the summer, the typical age of 3 routine. My house sits close to the end of my street, which forms a U as well, but for some reason the bus driver would never drop me off at my house. I would always get dropped off at the end of my street, where I would toddle myself along back home. Both my parents worked late hours, and sometimes not getting home until 8 p.m, and it would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting 6th grade, when the bus dropped me off at home, I would just be by myself. I'd do the usual middle school routine, play games online and watch some TV, and occasionally my neighbour's cat would come into my backyard, and I would feed and pet her as a way to get outside. The only computer in the house was in my dad's workroom, which has a window overlooking the deck, and a window overlooking the side of the house. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and the kitchen of my house, and since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. So most days, when I get home, I'd toss off my backpack and go right to that room, and you could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from the outside. Unfortunately, this would lead to something that I had forgotten about up until now. So when I got off the bus, I did as expected, go into my dad's workroom and play the computer games, and about 30 minutes into this, I can hear faint meowing coming from outside the window. I pause the game and look outside, thinking that maybe my neighbour's cat had wandered over, but there was nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again. It was quiet but noticeable, and so I checked the other window. Nothing again. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes, and eventually I got frustrated and went into the living room to watch some TV. But not even 2 minutes later, meowing came from the window that I was sitting right beside. Now, I was confused and honestly a little creeped out as well, so I shut the blinds and kept trying to watch TV. The meows continued, but only when they came from the window right behind me did I jump and leave the living room, officially skeeved. I went into my bedroom where the blinds were down, but still cracked for some sunlight. I tried to read a book, only to hear a meow come from outside of my bedroom window. This was enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt, but I couldn't see it to be sure. He said that he would have a neighbour come to check it out and call me back later. 10 minutes go by and I get a call from my dad saying that he was coming home from work. There was nothing urgent in his voice, just that his job had gotten cancelled and he would come home early. I didn't think anything of it, and when he got home, I realised that the cat noises had stopped. Fast forward to the present, and I actually asked my dad about the strange incident, thinking that it was funny that the cat had followed me around like that. But what he told me next made my blood run cold. So after I called him, the neighbour did indeed come to check out the house, and what he found were large footprints leading in circles all around the house, clustered close to the wall so that even if I looked outside, I wouldn't see anything. Which means that someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was through the windows, and making cat noises to try to get me to come outside. They must have known that I was home alone, since it was easy to see me walk by myself down the street and let myself in like that. My neighbour immediately called my dad and searched the property, but didn't find anyone. The police were never called, since there was nothing but footprints that led off into the woods and got lost, and I never saw anyone either. But my dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me, though, to know that there are people who would use these tactics to try and lure kids out of their homes, and from there, do whatever they wanted to do. So this happened around 9 years ago when I was 11. There was a girl at school called Amy who didn't have many friends. She was very quiet, and honestly I thought that she was a bit strange, but I felt like it would be a nice thing to befriend her. We got talking, and she actually turned out to be really nice, and we became best friends rather quickly. It got to the point where I spent pretty much every weekend at her house, and then we would walk to school together as well. Even at my age, I knew that there was something weird about her dad, though, Kevin. He was very interested in me, it seemed, and always tried to play fight and stuff, which is weird in itself. Whenever he was around, I also felt weird. He was a short, fat man with grey-white hair, always had a weird smirk on his face and really wide eyes. It started off with stealing bits of my food when I wasn't looking, and then laughing and making sure to put his arms around my shoulders to apologise. He'd always be wherever we were, upstairs, downstairs, or garden, and he just kind of always lurked about. There was a day, too, where Amy's nan was visiting, Amy's mother's mum, and Kevin kissed her nan on the mouth, hello, which was weird. Then it turned into the creepiest and sloppiest French kiss that I'd ever seen. Everyone except me and Amy found it funny. She put on a smile when her family looked over, but I was horrified. Maybe I shouldn't have gone back, I know, but I felt like I had to, for Amy's sake. After that, there was a day where we were playing in her room, and Kevin came in and started an argument over nothing. It got heated, and he grabbed a rubbish bag saying that he was going to throw all of her toys away. Of course, an 11-year-old is going to go mad if they think their dolls are being thrown away, so she was hysterical. We followed him downstairs, where he told her that if she spoke to him like that again, she would regret it. It was then that he started to remove his belt. I mean, what the hell, right? She pushed me towards their front door, which is just in front of the stairs, so we could run out of it, but she was sort of half laughing as if she was trying to convince me that it wasn't serious. I could tell that it was, though, but I got to the door, and when I turned around and waited, Kevin slammed it shut. But not the porch door, and then all I heard was Amy screaming at the top of her lungs. I was scared, but I didn't want to leave her, and so I just kind of stood there. Eventually, I found the courage to go back in, and I went upstairs to Amy, who was brushing her doll's hair. She smiled at me, but she had a tear-stained face. There were no visible marks, but all there was on show were her arms, so he could have really hit her anywhere. I then felt as if I had to protect her, so I continued going there, and didn't tell my mum a thing. One night I woke up thirsty, and we were close enough for me to just go get myself a drink, so I went upstairs, and Kevin was laying there, on the floor, in the dark, with nothing but tighty-whities on, and he just kind of weirdly stared at me. It was the creepiest thing, too. Just the street lamp from outside shining through a gap in the blind lit up the room enough to see, and I didn't get myself a drink. I just ran back upstairs. I wouldn't go there after that until I knew for sure that he wouldn't be there, and I didn't sleep over anymore, too. Anyway, I was talking to Amy recently, and she actually opened up to me because she sent me her mental health assessment sheet. And when she was 10, she woke up to Kevin, well, you can probably guess the rest, her 15-year-old sister. Kevin isn't her sister's dad, but not like that makes anything better, right? Who was screaming for Amy. It also stated that he beat Amy on a regular basis. Her most recent was 2 years ago. He beat her up in front of a friend, and her friend called the police. I told her the things that I'd seen, and how I knew that something just wasn't right. All I know of him now is that he's in hospital suffering with COPD, and quite honestly, I don't care. We moved into a new house when I was 10-ish years old. There was nothing special about the house, but I got a room in the basement which was way bigger than my old room, so I was thrilled. That didn't last long because the very first night that we slept there, come bedtime, I headed to my room. And as soon as I got to the stairs, I instantly regretted picking that room. It was dark and secluded, and it really freaked me out at night. But I made my way downstairs and I climbed into bed. I fell asleep and I wake up at about 2 or 3 in the morning to hear a girl sobbing. It scared me pretty badly, but it was coming from the side of the room. The door was on, so I dare not make a run for it. The crying goes on for 5 to 10 minutes and then slowly just kind of winds down. I finally calm myself and eventually I go back to sleep. This happens every single night for months. I didn't want to tell my parents, so I asked my brother to sleep in the room with me, and every time that he slept in my room with me, not a sound. It's frustrating, but weird enough that I finally just kind of got used to it. Sometimes I wouldn't even wake up, but I know deep down that it was occurring while I was sleeping. Then, a few months later, I started dreaming of a girl in a wedding dress, but it looks like she was in a car accident. She was disfigured and scary as hell to me. She would always be sitting holding something, but in the dream I was always too scared to look. This dream also kept reoccurring for quite some time until the sound and the dream were pretty much every night's events. And this goes on and on and on, and as time passes, it bothers me less and less. Then one night, I wake up and I hear the same sobbing. I roll over and try to go back to sleep, but before I can notice the cry starting to switch, it slowly goes from crying to this deranged laugh. This freaks me out badly for some reason. I panic and I get up and I run towards the door, even if it is towards the sound. I get to the door and the sound is right next to me. I don't know if the door was locked or if I was just panicked, but I couldn't open it too, and I started screaming and screaming at the top of my lungs. I hear the footsteps of my parents running towards me. I hear them running down the stairs, and I'm in complete panic. The door starts shaking like they're trying to open it, and as this is happening, I feel someone grab my arm, and at that, I just lose it. I'm ripping at the door and trying to get it open with my parents on the other side. I get it to finally open, expecting my dad on the other side. When I do, there's nobody there. The door is open though, so I run upstairs screaming and crying. Now that I'm upstairs, my parents finally hear me and they come out of their bedroom. I tell them everything and they just kind of look lost. But I told them right there and then that I would never go back down there again, and they let me start sleeping in the living room. I never heard it again after that, and I never really went back downstairs too. Months later, we moved, and I kind of got over it, but that was definitely one of the scariest moments of all of my childhood. I met Carter at a convention, and right off the bat, he kind of scared me. I heard rumors that he'd nearly been removed from the extremely liberal convention, but he seemed nice enough and kind of lonely, so I decided to befriend him since he insisted. But then I noticed that he was always just kind of nearby. When I was walking to my hotel, he was there. When I was eating lunch, he was there. When I was in my private group, he waited outside the door. But when I went to meetings, he went too and sat beside me. He usually either walked up to me and started a conversation, which ended in awkward silence, or just kind of stared at me from 50 yards away. I couldn't believe that he was really following me, so I went to my hotel, disguised myself, and went outside to see if he was there. And he was. And I mean, literally lurking in the trees nearby. He pressured me into giving my number, so I gave him a fake one. He found my professional information and begged me to look over his work, which I declined. He asked if I'd be at a party, and I lied and said no. He showed up anyway. Somehow he knew that I decided to go. He always talked about how lonely and depressed he was too, and how I was a lifeline. Until, on my way home from the convention, I had no phone service during the flight. He freaked out and spammed like 49 messages until ending with, "Okay, fine, I'm going to end myself now, just so you know," strongly implying that it was my fault for not answering him immediately. I told him to call 911. I then blocked him. He contacted me through Instagram, Hangouts, email, and more, but I never replied. In fact, I asked the convention security to speak with him about his creepy behavior, and I was told to just turn your phone off. Fast forward a few months, though, and I get an email from James asking me to look over his work. Not a big deal. I run a program specifically for this sort of thing. I agreed, since his email was very polite and well-worded, but he seemed pushy in a way that I couldn't figure out. I ignored it, reviewed his work, and ceased communication. But you can probably see where this is going, right? So a little while later, he confessed that it was Carter all along. He put all the blame on me and apologized in a really horrible and kind of manipulative way, begging me once again to review his work. I never replied, and here we are. So, I just got back home from an appointment in town, and I can't seem to shake what I saw on the ride back. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and it was around 8 p.m. at this point, so it was pretty dark out. I live in an area with a lot of homeless people, so it's not uncommon for me to pass by them roaming around at night. I was just kind of staring at the window super absent-mindedly, my eyes not even fully focused on the images going by, when I saw this older woman walking around by herself on the sidewalk. She had headphones on over her ears, and she was in dirty clothing with a bunch of blankets draped over her shoulders. She was smiling and kind of pointing at something above her. She was laughing too, looking like she found whatever it was above her to be pretty amusing. I barely registered it because I just kind of assumed that it was another homeless person on drugs seeing something that wasn't there. But when I passed by, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something floating above her head, right where she was staring and pointing up at. And honestly, it looked like the bottom of someone's feet. It was like someone was standing right above her, wearing a long and ragged cloak. That's all I could make out from my view from the car window, but my eyes didn't even focus on it. and when I realized what I saw, I searched in all the mirrors and turned around in my seat to get a better look, but there was nothing there. And I mean, there wasn't even anything. No lampposts, no lights, nothing. Nothing that could have been mistaken for what I saw near the woman, at least. There was only one of those tall wooden posts for electrical lines further down the street, but that was it. Now, the only explanation that I can think of is that the power of suggestion made my eyes play tricks on me or something. I'm a believer in the paranormal for sure, but I'm also very skeptical when it comes to personal experiences like this because I know the mind is very good at making things up. But I just keep thinking about it, and I know that there was nothing else on that street, and I also know what I saw. Does anyone know what this might have been? I have no idea why now, out of all times, that I would see something like this, and why there was a woman that seemed to be able to see it too. The whole situation just has me really confused. So back when I was around the age of 14, I lived with my dad, my two elder brothers, and my older sister in this small house that we used to call the greenhouse. It had a fairly big backyard for our 4 blue-nosed pits to enjoy, and a regular-sized front yard, but a small living space inside the house. Although old, it was a cozy place and felt quite welcoming as a whole. Anyways, one night, all of my siblings were in the boys' room, my brother's room, playing on their PS3, and I, for some reason, didn't want to be in there, so I went into the living room, which is right outside the boys' room. I say for some reason because when I was younger, I was very scared of being alone in the dark, so that was pretty unusual for me to do. All the lights off were in the rooms, and I was just kind of sitting on the couch playing with my sister's DS. I was playing a SpongeBob game, and that was my whole source of light. I'm sitting in the corner, and to the left of me is my brother's room, and straight in front of me is the doorway to the kitchen. In the middle of playing on the DS, I just pointed the screen at the doorway of the kitchen to light it up so that I could see, but there was nothing. It wasn't like a force or impulse that made me point the light, but more of an unconscious movement. After no more than 20 seconds had passed, I did it again and pointed my sister's DS to the doorway, but this time I saw her. She was a young girl crawling with her hands and feet across the doorway, upside down on my ceiling. She had long black hair that dangled, her eyes were dark red, but her body was very pale, and it looked as if her body glowed a bit. She stopped in the middle of the doorway like a deer caught in headlights. I could see her whole body, and she turned her head, and we made eye contact. I don't know how long I stared at her emotionless, but after some time, I shut my hand down to hide the light, and after a few seconds, I pointed it back up, and she was just gone. I remember that I kept asking myself over and over again, why didn't she scare me? Why didn't I feel scared when we were making eye contact? It confused me a lot, and after sitting there for a bit, I called out for my sister to go into the kitchen and turn on the light. It confused me a lot, and after sitting there for a bit, I called out for my sister to go out to the kitchen and turn on the light. The light switch was right under the spot the little girl was crawling around. She was skeptical but went and turned it on anyways, and after she did, I got up to investigate, but after finding nothing, I confessed to what just happened. I know that it was really messed up for me to send my sister in there blindly like that, but I hope you can understand that I was worried afterward and needed some comfort and reassurance from the light being turned on. To this day, I really don't know what I saw or if it was all just in my head or what. All I know is that, whatever it was, this girl had an emptiness to her. I don't know if she meant any harm, and I never actually saw her again after that. I experienced many more paranormal events, but not in the greenhouse, so I don't know. The whole situation is a strange one, for sure. This happened back in the 90s when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was actually in. I would have been around 11 years old, I think, living in a regional city of Australia, and for the last year I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and whatnot, and felt really singled out by my teacher as well. My mum, she worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, we'd literally just walk out of class, down the road and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there, along the main road. A couple of times I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking, and while I was sitting outside of my mum's work site too. So after a while, I started seeing this car driving up my street at home and parked along the street as well that my brother and I would ride our bikes around in. I don't remember thinking that it was strange because it was a small town and it wasn't unusual to see the same cars or people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. My family followed a serious routine. Mondays were swimming and tutoring, Tuesdays were netball training, Wednesday netball game, Thursday basketball training, Fridays we would go and see a professional basketball or football, depending on the season, game. Saturday was my brother's basketball games, and Sundays were our day to go to the river with friends for swims and a barbecue lunch. And that never really changed unless someone was sick. So one Friday night, I'm dressed and ready to go watch this basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I'm pretty sure that they're in the car, which is in the garage under our 2-story house, and to get to it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of the house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door, and at the end of our driveway is a small white car. Now, I've never taken that much notice of the white cars up until this point, and it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot for our neighbours, but I just, for some reason, got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I go closer to the bottom, the driver's side door opens and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. And that was the point when something inside me just told me to scream for my parents and run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that. And this guy, who was halfway up my driveway at this point, turned around and ran back to his car and just drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had actually happened, and, of course, they didn't believe me. A week later, though, there was a notice in our school newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to abduct another child from my school on the same night. My parents were very shaken by this and took me seriously after reading that. I don't think that he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings from that point on. So, this was a hike up to Half Dome. We had a campground about 20 minutes drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, 18-year-old male, my uncle, 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend, Dee. There were 2 girls too with us, but they aren't really relevant to the story. So, my uncle and his friend are both Christians, so there were no substances consumed that would induce the feelings that I'll be talking about. We get to our campsite too, and we set up camp and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 and start hiking by 4:30, but for some reason I just randomly wake up at 3:30 in the morning, like completely wide awake, and look out of my hammock, and I remember feeling this really odd feeling as if I was woken up by something. And I remember looking at the moonlit scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself that the whole thing just kind of looks like a dream. I lay back in my hammock, but I can't go to sleep, and end up waking up my uncle and my friend at 3:50. My uncle asks me, "Were you walking around at night?" This is important, but I say no and ask why. He says that he woke up for some reason and could hear someone walking around. Not like an animal, but a person. I say, weird, and in the end we just kind of brush it off. We get to the trailhead around 4:30, and as everyone is unloading the car, Dee says that he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple of them before the trailhead. I walk behind him for some time before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with the road to the trailhead, and the bathroom is directly across from the intersection through the field a little. Those who have been there will know what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for Dee to come out of the bathroom. We wait for about 10 minutes before I go and check the bathroom, and he just isn't there. I go back to my uncle and tell him that, and he says, weird, and maybe he went back to the car or something, and we decide to wait a bit more. By 5:10, we begin to worry a bit, and my uncle goes to check out the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure that we don't miss him if he went down the road or something away from the trailhead. My uncle returns and says that he isn't there either. We decide that maybe he went up the trailhead without us for some reason, and walk up there in about 10 minutes. He isn't there either, and we're just kind of baffled now because there's just no other logical places that he would go. I decide to turn back and check the car and the bathroom again, but I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He's sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes, and I say, "Where have you been?" And he says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection, that we weren't there, and that he just assumed that we went to the trailhead and started walking and then met me. I say, "What do you mean? We waited at the intersection for over an hour and a half and checked at the car, the bathroom, and the trailhead, and you weren't anywhere." He says, "Well, I don't know. I just went to the bathroom." He then asks me where my uncle is, and I say at the trailhead, and he asks me again. I tell him again, and note that it was weird that he asked me twice. As we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off on the riverbank and exclaims, "Oh, maybe that's him." And I just look at him and kind of keep walking. I thought that his behavior was really strange, like he wasn't thinking straight or something. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight, one of the girl's gloves, a water bottle, etc. It was kind of like we just simply forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we could have left them. On the way back, it got really dark, and we turned on our flashlights, and as we near the end of the hike, after the two waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we'd been walking for far too long, and my uncle also confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's been way too long to get back?" I say, "Yeah, I was just thinking that." But we keep walking, and it still seems that we weren't making any kind of progress, if that's the right word. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking, I couldn't spot any familiar landmarks. It was just really weird, and there was this odd feeling in the air too, sort of a slight menacing feeling. It's hard to describe, but I remember thinking that it feels like the woods are alive. We remark 3 more times about how long this hike is taking and begin to laugh at it because it just felt so ridiculous. After a bit, we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch, and we eventually make it back to the car. Now, all of this seemed odd at the time, but I just kind of brushed it off. And I only realized just how weird those events felt after we got home, and my aunt asks my uncle, "Were you camping?" And he says, "Yeah, how did you know?" As we didn't tell them that we were going since it was kind of last minute. She says that she had this odd dream where she sees my uncle in a tent in a forest somewhere and someone is outside of his tent. She says that she couldn't see who it was, but knew that there was a presence there, and then she woke up at around 3 and had the strong urge to pray for him, and she did. My uncle kind of looks at me after that like, "Are you hearing this?" And I honestly don't know what to make of any of this, but I wanted to post it here because I would love to hear your opinions. What do you guys think? This happened about 13 or 14 years ago in my home country, the Dominican Republic. I'm 30 now, so it was a while ago, but I've never been able to get it out of my head. So, it was spring break, and a group of friends and we went up to our friend's dad's house in the mountains. It's a town called Constanza, and it's the highest settlement in the country, sitting at about 1,200 meters, around 4,000 feet. The house is a bit higher up, as it's located roughly 45 minutes from town going up a straight mountain. It's the highest house in the area, in fact. And there was around 5 or 6 of us, and we'd been hanging out for a few days up there. Just having fun, barbecuing, playing pool and having a few beers, just kind of kicking back. On the third or fourth day, we were all tired since we spent the day walking and horse riding. At around 10 p.m, everyone was out cold, except for my friend, a son of the owner's house, and I. We'd been pals for a while, and we'd been up there a handful of times before. We always used to stay up late and hang up around on the terrace and the deck, talking about just random stuff, really. We had already been out there for a while at this point on these reclining patio chairs, and we were looking at the sky and literally counting the shooting stars. But they're so common up there that it became a sort of game for us. When suddenly, a huge, when compared to the other stars at least, white circular light appeared in the sky. I really don't know how to describe the size, but I want to say that it looked like 15 or 20 times the size of a regular star or a faraway airplane light or something. It didn't appear to be close. In fact, it kind of looked like it was far away. But this light just kind of sat there, completely still. We asked each other if we were seeing the same thing, but we didn't talk much after. It felt kind of entrancing or something, and we both fell silent just looking at it for about a minute. Out of nowhere, this light just starts bouncing around the sky at an incredible speed over a huge distance in the sky. The best way I can describe it is that it moved like the ball in Pong, the old school video game, inside what looked like a defined area, kind of like a square or a rectangle. The bouncing around went on for about 30 seconds or so, and then it just kind of disappeared. No trace of the light whatsoever, and nothing. But here's the weirdest part. So, after this, we just immediately felt sleepy. We were actually dozing off in a matter of seconds, and I don't remember who said that we should go to sleep, or if any of us actually said it, but we stood up and we just went to our rooms. And that night, I had the most vivid and realistic dream that I've ever had, and that's what keeps me awake at night. This dream was just different. I remember being on a spaceship, moving on top of a river. I never felt scared or in danger or anything, but I never saw anyone or anything else either. But I did feel a presence there with me. I was standing in the front part of the ship, in front of a huge window just looking out. We were moving slowly on top of this river, floating or flying, and it looked like the river was coming to an end, kind of like a waterfall, when we reached the end, and we just kept on flying, and I could see this amazing view, just tons of waterfalls, and each had structures and buildings on the rivers, and it looked like a futuristic city built on those rivers and the surrounding lands, and it was amazing, truly amazing. I didn't see much else after that, but one of the most bizarre things is that I heard or felt numbers. It was a long sequence, which I think were coordinates or something similar that they were trying to tell me. I woke up and I still remember those numbers, similar to when you wake up and remember a dream very vividly, but forget almost instantly. I stood up kind of dazed and confused and went looking for something to write, but I forgot them before I could do anything. A lot of years have gone by since then, and I'm still convinced that these beings were trying to tell me where they were and who they are. I'm not sure why they need to tell us, human beings, where they are or why they chose me, but I do believe it. I've never had any other paranormal, ghost, abduction, or otherworldly experiences since or after it, so this one has obviously really stuck over the years. But I just wanted to share my experiences and hopefully find others who may have had similar ones. This happened when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My mother was a dealer for Coca-Cola at the time in the rural regions of my city, so that means that she and her fellow employees would be delivering crates of Coke to little villages in the boonies pretty regularly. On this particular day, no deliveries were scheduled and anything that was to be delivered was already done, so we were all just kind of all hanging out at the warehouse. My mum figured since it was the end of the week, let's all go out on a little road trip with the crew. Everyone agreed, and then one of the crew suggested that we go to this new inland resort a couple of towns over. It was nothing fancy, just a large area with a few pools, a pond where you can catch your own catfish for meals and whatnot, and bamboo huts along the sides. We all get in the truck and off we go. We arrive sometime in the early afternoon, and Mum is telling members of the crew what to do. One books a hut, one gets our staff in order and someone to keep an eye on me. While I look around, never wandering too far, I see an old lady, maybe in her late 50s or maybe 40s I suppose, looking at me. I was a friendly kid, so I waved and smiled. She just stared at me, so I told the crew member who was looking after me, who in turn told my mum. She informed everyone to watch out for her and to make sure someone always has eyes on her. We proceed on merrymaking, and Mum's swimming in the pool, Mum and the crew are having a few drinks and eating some catfish. This dragged on till maybe 6 or 7 o'clock in the afternoon. I stayed in the pool the majority of the time and would just come up for a bit of soda, but on my last attempt to jump in, I see from the far end of the pool that same old lady. I immediately tell my mum, who looks in her direction and tells everyone that we're packing up and we're going back to the warehouse. We get back and Mum requests that 3 of the guys stay the night at the old house, and if they could stay up one at a time just to be safe. Sometime in the middle of the night, though, I get woken up to my mum telling me to be quiet and follow her to one of the bedrooms in the back and to leave my slippers so we don't make any noise. I ask why, and she pointed out to the other side of the gate, and there was that same lady. She insists that I go to one of the rooms at the back of the house and stay there till she gets me. I follow and then hear her wake the crew up. I hear them leave the house and confront the lady by the gate with questions like, "Who are you? What do you want? How did you follow us?" But Mum said that she just glared at them while mumbling, and now and then would crane her neck, looking past them as if to look for something. She eventually leaves, and in the morning I'm taken back to the city to my actual house, while my mum went back to the town to continue her job and inform the local authorities of this person. We never did see the lady again, and it's been 20 years since then, but I asked my mum about the old lady again and whatever happened to her report. And she said that she and the 3 crew members that confronted her went straight to the town hall before they started on work. It's a small town, so it wasn't that hard to find someone via description, and they did find out who she was. The local authorities went to this little bamboo hut on the edge of town about a mile or so into some wooded area. The plan was to give her a warning, but when they got to the hut, nobody was in. They checked the windows, but nobody was inside or around the area. But someone did live there because there were ducks and chickens in a small pen on the side of the house. But they just decided to leave and update Mum later in the afternoon. And nothing really ever happened after that because they never saw anyone at that house again. So I've been working as a guard for a few months, and I noticed noises and just odd occurrences since my first day there. The layout of my patrol is a 2-part office building, one side, the north side, using only a floor for offices, the second floor and the first floor for storage for spare chairs and cubicle walls. The other side, the south side, is abandoned when the company housed in that section moved to a new location, both floors being full with cubicles, chairs, desks. The posters date there to about 2013, I think. There's no files or personal property. All of that stuff is in the south section, but the lights don't work properly due to the weather damage in 2016. So, when I start my patrol, I start on the bottom floor of the north offices, which is mostly barren aside from a tornado shelter, cubicle walls stored against a wall, and the janitor's supply room. Down on this floor, though, I felt my jacket grabbed more than once while checking the area. The second floor where the offices is more active than the bottom floor though, where chairs move and roll into the hallway and the sound of the filing cabinet slams shut all the time. But when I check to see if anyone is around, I find some half open and papers on the floor. The south building is the worst one though. The first day that I did a patrol, I had chairs, not desk ones with wheels, move positions more than once. And while I would like to blame my co-workers, only 2 people have keycards to that building, security and maintenance. When I'm on the top floor, I have heard office doors slam, and when I investigate to find the doors, I routinely hear footsteps upstairs. My co-workers have claimed to hear voices and seen shadows as well. The closest thing that I've had happen besides the sounds was a flashlight, new batteries that I replaced the day before, constantly flickering on the bathroom floor of the south building, and returning to normal when I leave. I'm actually going to try investigating some more of this sometime on Tuesday. I'm going to try and take a digital recorder in and see if anything happens. I'll also try to replicate the flashlight issue and see if it was just a hardware thing or not. Anyway, if you guys have any good tips on what I should do or what is the best way to try and capture this stuff, I'm all ears. This happened in summer school when I was in 7th grade. On the first day that I arrived there, I went to my science class. Everyone there introduced themselves, and honestly, nobody seemed too off. I was kind of excited, in fact, to do some work, which was weird for me. But here's when the person in question shows up. He's late, and he looks like your stereotypical nerd. His name was Henry. The first day, he actually doesn't do anything wrong or weird, but that changed quickly. The second day, the teacher is passing out iPads for us to use. Every day we would log what we learned, or do mini assignments on them. And she explains the project that we'll be doing on them. After everyone's finished, she collects them. Then, when she picks Henry's, she gets agitated with what she sees on it. He was watching porn, the third day, and this is when he starts interacting with me. We have to draw for an assignment, so I'm just minding my own business doing that. Then he walks up to me and he's like, "Wow, that's really good." He was also really loud whenever he talked. I said thanks and thought that would be the end of it, but no. We have a bathroom break a few minutes later, and I'm waiting outside to use the bathroom. There's more than one stall, but we have to go one at a time, and he's waiting too. He starts talking to me and telling me how cute and shy I am. I cannot stress this next part enough, though, that whenever he got near me, he'd punch my shoulders playfully. Like, it was so obvious that he just wanted some way to touch me, and after I go to the bathroom, we go back to class and nothing else happens there. Then it's lunchtime, and this is the real kicker. I'm walking up to the lunch line, and guess who's there? Yep, it's Henry. I'm keeping my head down, so hopefully he wouldn't notice me, but no such luck. He says to me, "You look like you want to die." I honestly don't know what to say to that, but then I say, "I do, haha." And then he then pulls up his sleeve on one of his arms and is like, "Well, at least you don't have these." And then he puts faint lines on his wrists. They were self-harm scars, and obviously this kid was pretty messed up. So I go through the lunch line with him in front of me, and he quietly murmurs to himself and attempts to talk to me a little. I go to sit down at a table. I didn't have any friends there, so I looked lonely, and he sits next to me. I'm watching YouTube on my phone, and he pulls out my hand and asks what I'm watching. I say Dr. Phil, and he's like, "Haha, wow, that's so stupid." I didn't reply. He just sat super close to me, though, watching me eat for a few minutes, and eventually he finally leaves. I go to the bathroom after lunch, and turns out he followed me into the bathroom. Before I get into the stall, I turn around because I hear footsteps, and I yell at him, and he bolts out. I tell my teacher, and he's kicked out from summer school for now, but this is really starting to creep me out. When I was 4, way back in the 1950s, I went down to the bank restroom in the basement. I was doing my business on the porcelain throne when an adult foot nudged my foot under the stall wall. Irritated, I kicked back at the foot. And the next thing I knew, an adult was cajoling me to open the stall door and let him in. I got very frightened, and I didn't know what to do. The stall was up against the wall, the first one in line. The creepy man forced the door open, which I was putting my shoulder against, and when it gave way, I was knocked flat on my back on the floor. Looking up from the floor, I saw a very serene and dignified old man. with grey white hair stuck up out of the wall. With a very sinister smile, he said to my attacker, "His father is going to be down here in about 30 seconds. Believe me when I tell you this, you don't want to be here when he arrives." Whether of shame at getting caught in such an act or stunned by a man stepping out of the wall, my attacker raced away. I heard his steps pounding up the stairs. Seconds after that, my father arrived and was looming in the stall door looking down on me. He scooped me up and ran his hands all over me to make sure nothing was broken, and then raced after my assailant. By the time that he got up the stairs, the man had made it out of the bank and down the city streets. My father was a combat marine from World War II, and also been a boxing champion of the 7th Fleet, and he later told me that my voice shouted in his mind to run to the restroom right then. The attacker ran right by him. I'm obviously glad, for the angel had stopped the assault upon me. I'm equally glad that he chased off the guy before my dad could get there, because my dad would surely have beaten him to death, no doubt about it. That angel saved us both, me from the attacker, and my father from going to jail. Until recently, I, a 22 female, was doing door-to-door election work, getting people registered to vote and stuff like that, and had to quit because I was made acutely aware of just how easily I could end up in a very dangerous situation. At my job, we all got driven out in a van to different areas and dropped off alone for about 8 hours until we got picked back up. We each had an iPad with a list of addresses and the names of the people living at those addresses, as well as their age and gender, so we generally had an okay idea of whether or not the person who answered the door was the person who we were looking for. Quite often, though, a family member would answer the door and then go and get the person that I was trying to speak with, so having a random person answer the door wasn't completely unusual at all. It was also an unusually cold day and was around 8 PM, so already dark. So, when a guy in his late to mid-20s asked me to step inside for a moment while he got his father, who was the person that I was looking for, I felt a little uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude, especially since he asked me if I needed water or a bottle or anything. After I stepped inside, though, he closed the door, saying that he didn't want to let the heat out, and then said that he was going to get his father from the kitchen. While I was waiting for them to come back, I stepped further in, away from the door so that I could pet his dog, who was very friendly. And all of a sudden, I realized the guy was just behind me, in between me and the door, because I'd walked forward towards the dog, and there was a hallway running perpendicular to the direction of the front room that ended close to the front door, if that makes sense. This guy then told me that he'd been mistaken, and his dad actually wasn't at home. I honestly think that my brain just froze for a couple of minutes because I just kind of stood there, staring at him and unable to understand what was happening. The guy then started asking very personal questions, and the way that he was talking and his body language was much more intimidating and brazen than it had been before. I'm 5'8" and around 120, so not tiny, but this guy was a big guy. In the middle of him talking about how it's dangerous for a nice girl like you to be out by myself at night, and how I should really be more careful, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, and pretended like I knew who it was and that they worked with me. It was actually a telemarketer, and I've honestly never been happier to get a call from anyone, really. As I was on the phone, I mentioned the address that I was at and thanked them for being on their way. The guy tried to laugh it off and even told me to remember what he said about staying safe out there, but I honestly think that I would have been attacked if I hadn't have gotten that spam call. The scariest thing to me, though, was realizing later that he probably pretended to go look for his father out of my line of sight, just so that he could get a weapon or something, because otherwise, why not just grab me as soon as I stupidly stepped inside? It was a near miss. Of that, I'm convinced. From 5 years old till 10 when we moved, there was a ghost or a demon lady or something that visited me every single night. And I have a lot of stories of her coming into my room and just kind of staring at me. but I have a few that stain my memory the most. So, I'm now 25 years old with 2 daughters of my own, and I'm so paranoid that she'll somehow mess with my kids too, that I pray to God often that she doesn't. I would cover my entire body with stuffed animals from head to toe, and I would plug my ears just so that I could fall asleep. It always happened the same, though. I would be laying in my bed with my light on, because I couldn't sleep at all without my lamp on, and even though it never helped, at least I could see a little better. But as I'm laying there trying to fall asleep, everything would just get extremely quiet. That's when I knew that she was coming. It would take about a minute before she got right beside my bed, but once she was there, I knew it, because I could feel it. I would peek out from under my animals and see her standing or floating there, just staring at me with this horrible face so pale that I would freak and run to my mum's and stepfather's room and jump into bed with my mum, and then I could fall asleep okay. Well, one night, this routine played out. I cried and cried every night, begging my stepdad to let me keep my light on, and finally, it caved like always. I was trying to sleep, and she slithered in. I took off to my mum's room, and I jumped into bed. Except this time, my stepdad wasn't having it. He told me to go back to my room, and I completely broke down. My mum finally talked him into letting me sleep on the floor next to my mum and the wall of the room. I lay down there, holding my mum's hand that was hung over the side of the bed to comfort me, staring up at the ceiling, watching the fan rotate. When it suddenly got super quiet, and I remember thinking, no way, she can't get me in here with my mum. And I held my mum's hand tight. Then I saw her floating around the foot of my mother's bed, coming towards the side that I was on. She always had a white gown on and long black hair, and she moved so silently that it was weird and kind of sickening. I have never in my entire life so far been so terrified. I screamed and screamed, and my mother and stepfather jumped up, asking what was wrong. Well, what's wrong with you? And all I could say was that she's trying to get me. Mum, she's trying to get me. My mum let me sleep in the bed that night, and I was fine after that. But it's really hard to put into words just how much torment this lady or this thing put me through. I mean, I was constantly sleeping in school because I couldn't sleep at home. I would beg to stay the night at my aunt's house or my grandmother's. Even one time she followed me to my aunt's house, and I ran outside and sat in the middle of the street until my aunt got home at about 7 the next morning. It was just truly horrible. Even today, though, 20 years later, I'm a grown-ass man with a family, and sometimes at night, I lay awake thinking about her, worried to death that she may find me again. I've had panic attacks in the middle of the night dreaming about her too, and there's only 2 people in the world that even know about her besides me, and that's my wife and mother. And well, now too, whoever listens to this horribly put-together story that I'm sure some won't even believe. But for me, it's the most real thing that I've ever experienced. By the way, too, this is just one of the times that I really remember. There's about probably 10 that stick in my mind. But anyway, there it is, and thanks for listening. I was in grade 8, and it was summertime, so it was really hot out. It was late at night, probably around 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. or something. I was trying to sleep, and my window was open because my room was hot. I had a screen on my window so that the bugs couldn't get in, obviously. So I was dozing off, about to fall asleep, when I heard something up against the house underneath my window. It sounded like a faint banging, maybe. I tried to ignore it, as sometimes parents have squirrels that run along their houses and whatnot. But then it got louder and closer, and I sat up in my bed trying to examine the sound, and it continued. I then called for my mum, as her bedroom was across the hall, and the sound just instantly stopped. My mum came in and told me to go back to sleep as she didn't hear anything, and so I went back to sleep without incident. In the morning, I woke up and carried on with my day. My mum had to do some yard work, so she went outside in the backyard. A few minutes later, she came rushing back inside into my bedroom. I was confused, so I followed her and asked what was wrong. She didn't answer, but then in a panic, she went downstairs to talk to my dad. And it turns out that there was a 6-foot ladder resting up against my bedroom window, and the screen of my window was cut wide open as if someone had taken a knife to it. My parents called the police, but nothing ever came of it, and I often wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't wake up and call for my mum that night. Now, to this day, I still cannot explain this. I don't know what happened this night, but it was about 11 and I was winding down for the night. I did my normal nightly routine, which included using the restroom and leaving a light on in the bathroom. Important for later. I do this so that I can see better when going to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. So I climbed into bed and prepared to go to sleep. When not even 3 minutes into me laying down, with my eyes closed, I hear very clearly the voice of a woman whisper in my ear, "I am here." At that point, I shot up right out of bed, but before I could do anything else, I hear footsteps walking up to my door and stop right outside of it. Now, this could have been a random noise, I admit, but what was worse is that I would see the shadow of 2 feet standing just on the other side of my door due to the light coming from the bathroom. At this point, I could barely move from the seated position that I was in my bed. After about 5 minutes, I decided to turn on my TV so that I had some background noise. As the TV was powering on, though, I started to hear the sound of someone breathing coming from under my bed. And I know that it wasn't just me because I could hear it even when I held my breath. So, naturally, I was in absolute terror and I could barely move from my bed, and I stayed that way for about another 2 or so hours. I don't remember why exactly, but at some point, I needed to get out of bed and grab something, but I still occasionally was hearing breathing from under my bed. I felt better getting up, knowing that I had a knife on my bedstand and I could defend myself if needed, so I got out of bed and decided to look underneath. I grabbed a flashlight and my knife and then looked, and to my shock, there was nothing. This definitely cleared up a little bit of the terror that I was feeling, but there were still feet on the other side of my door that had been standing there now for 2 hours. So I built up the courage and I opened the door quickly, and yet again, there was nothing there. Even after clearing this up, I still didn't sleep at all that night, and to this day, I cannot fathom what happened that night. I don't know how to explain it, or if there even is an explanation, but if any of you guys have any thoughts on what it could have been, could you please let me know, because this happened about a month ago, and I haven't had any other experiences near this since, but it's left me pretty shaken. So this happened in an old farmhouse a few miles away from where I live, and the case is actually unsolved to this day. I live in Bavaria, Germany. It's an area with a lot of mountains and forests, and the whole thing happened around 100 years ago. So the family who lived in the farmhouse, along with 2 workers there, experienced many paranormal things, like foot trails in the snow, which just led to nowhere a few meters into the forest, strange sounds at night, and the youngest daughter telling the family that she was often visited by a tall man at night. Anyways, one morning, the whole family was just found dead in their beds. Everyone had their head smashed in with a blunt object. There were no signs that someone broke in, and the doors were all locked when the police arrived. Also, nothing was taken from the family, not even a golden necklace that the mother owned, which was right beside her bed, and should have been obvious to any burglar. The police also stated that there had been a lot of hate involved in the crime because of the brutality. The police investigated the crime scene, but they didn't find anything. Another weird thing happened in the barn too. They locked it to investigate it later because there wasn't anything remarkable at first, but when they returned later, there was a rope that was hanging with a knot from the ceiling. No one knew how it got there, and It definitely wasn't there in the first place. And well, the case is around 100 years old, and if it happened nowadays, the police would have probably been able to solve it with modern technology. But the paranormal things surrounding it really creep me out. I've never visited the farmhouse, but many people say that it's still haunted, and I'm not sure about all that, but it's a disturbing story, to say the least.